Hello everyone, welcome to What If Deku Was Teleported to One Piece and Made His Own Crew Part 2. Before we start, please go support KimDog2 for writing that awesome fanfic. Unexpected meetings. A silence overtook the area as Hawkeye observed each of the pirates in front of him. First his attention went to Nami, Killer, and Monet. Each of them have their own unique style to them. The red-headed woman isn't a frontline fighter and seems to use those two creatures next to her for combat. Hawkeye looked Nami over, seeing how she subconsciously moved to the back of the group when she found out who he was, and had the Sun and Cloud move in front to defend her before moving on to Monet. She, while more willing to fight, seems the type to rely one misdirection before going on to in for the kill. The swordsman thought, having noticed the woman's arms become wings made snow before they froze over become ice. And finally the masked one. A much more traditional fighter who, despite his build, seems to be a hit-and-run fighter. Hawkeye thought as he saw the blades on Killer's mechanical gauntlets starting to spin at high speeds. An interesting trio. Mihawk thought before his eyes directed over to Bonnie, Kid, Law, and Hawkins. But nowhere near as interesting as them. He thought as he watched Law and Hawkins both grab their swords, Bonnie crack their knuckles, and Kid to create giant arms made out of various weapons that had been scattered around the deck. Each of them have the strength and drive to be captains of their own crews, and yet they've chosen to serve under another. Hawkeye observed. The two swordsmen do seem well trained with their swords, but it's obvious they have something else under their selves. Possibly devil fruits. The woman and red-haired man, while not as refined, do seem like they've honed their fighting prowess if their stances are anything to go by. Hawkeye thought before his eyes finally drifted to Izuku and a small smirk to appear on his face. This one has definitely seen battle, time and time again. His haki is also very impressive, especially for one so young. The swordsman finished his assessment and thoughts of the crew before finally speaking. Apologies for boarding your ship without permission, but I thought it was the quickest way to introduce myself. Hawkeye told them, bowing his head slightly in apologizes. Izuku kept his eyes trained on the swordsman while getting ready to fight the warlord should the need arise. At least I know who's been following us now, Izuku thought before speaking. How about instead of apologizing, you explain how and why you got on our ship, never mind getting into my room? Izuku demanded, with the swordsman gained a smirk. I did it when you were dealing with that fleet. You were all so focused on the fleet I was able to sneak past everyone, and you were so focused on your objective no one noticed me, not even your haki, despite you having been monitoring me for days. At this the crew's eyes widened, with Izuku cursing under his breath while the rest of the crew wondered what haki was exactly. As for why, well, I was at the food festival when it was attacked, and I watched as you were able to sink a fleet of ships almost entirely on your own. A truly impressive feat. Mihawk praised before continuing on with his tale. I grew curious of one who not only had that kind of power to do that, but was able to gather such a powerful crew of subordinates. He said with the more egotistical of the crew felt a rush of pride at being praised by such a powerful individual. So for the next few days I followed behind you to see just how your crew operated, though I will admit, dodging your detection did prove difficult at times. Mihawk admitted before shaking his head. Regardless, I continued to observe until you ran into that fleet from before, where I witnessed not only the captain show his skill and determination but also his subordinates. Hawkeye finished his tale. Well, that's all well and good, but why are you still here? You could have easily left when the island had dropped back into the ocean. So the question remains, why are you still here? Law demanded, narrowing his eyes and ready to create a room to disassemble the warlord in front of him. Said warlord simply smirked in amusement. Fine, I'll cut to the chase. Mihawk said before suddenly drawing his black blade Yoru and pointed directly towards Izuku, causing the entire to get into their fighting stances. I wish to face your captain in a duel. This threw the crew for a loop. And just why would you want that? Kid asked, trying to figure out the man's angle. Is it really that hard to believe? A man appearing with multiple devil fruits, some of which are still being used by other people at the moment. On top of that, he seems well versed in haki and the Six Powers, a material arts that's supposed to be only used by the world government. And appearing in the East Blue, the weakest and most peaceful of the seas of all places? Here Mihawk shook his head. There's no possible way I could ignore someone so interesting. He finished his explanation before looking towards Izuku. So will you fight me? Hawkeye asked with Izuku finally giving a reluctant nod. Fine, but not here. We need to find a place we can destroy that won't get anyone caught in the crossfire. Izuku told the warlord who nodded his head. Of course, there's a deserted island a few miles that way. It should suit our needs just fine. The older man informed the crew before walking to the back of the ship before suddenly jumping over the edge. Shocked, the Devil Kings immediately ran over to see where the man had gone only to find him sitting in a coffin-like boat that had been attacked to the Sharon. Right now if you all could just follow me, Hawkeye told the crew before sailing his ship away. The crew stared dumbfounded for a second, their minds trying to process what happened, until finally Kid found his voice. Okay, seriously, how the hell did we not notice that? Line break. Guys, I really don't like this, Nami said as she and the rest of the crew stood on the deck of their ship as they watched their captain and the warlord stand on the island and prepared to face each other. None of us do, Nami, but it was the best option we had. Monet said no, that the chance of escaping a warlord that was already on top of them, untouched, was impossible. Nami wasn't ready to give up yet. But still we should at least try and help him fight, Nami said, not understanding why the more bloodthirsty members of the crew were just standing there. Because we'd only get in the way. The answer came so unexpectedly it threw Nami off, even more so since it came from Kid of all people, who had his arms crossed and is staring at the two on the beach with a great intensity, but also anger and frustration. I don't know how to describe it. Call it instinct or a gut feeling, but I just know that if any of us go out there we'd be devoured by the two monsters currently standing there. Kid told the navigator, getting nods from the other man who had the same feeling themselves. Bonnie, seeing the looks of distress still on Navi's face, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Look, Nami, I know we haven't been together for that long, but from the short time I've been on this crew I've learned Izuku can be trusted to come through when it matters most. I mean, look at all he's accomplished here. Do you really think most of these guys would have agreed to join the crew of just anyone? Hell no. But they get the same feeling from Izuku that I do. Nami looked at Bonnie with wide eyes before looking towards the rest of the crew. True, they still had the same looks of frustration, but they also had looks of determination and pride, ready to stand by their captain till the end. Nami, seeing this, shook her head. She's right, this is the same man who saved my village and set me free. I need to have more faith in him. And with one final shake of her head she stared forward with the rest of the crew ready to watch this till the very end. No matter what. Line break. The air was silent and tense as the two warriors stared each other down, waiting for the first move to be made. The first one to move was Hawkeye, who slowly raised his right hand, causing Izuku to twitch and prepared to face the legendary Black Blade. Which is why it came as a small surprise where instead of his sword he reached for his cross necklace, which turned out to be a hidden knife. Mihawk, seeing the surprise on Izuku's face, simply raised the knife. Consider this a warm-up, and to see if you are worthy of the facing Yoro, was all he offered before suddenly disappearing for sight. Izuku's haki flared to life as he sidestepped to the side just in time for the knife to cut through the air where he had been a second ago. Izuku was quick to counterattack by throwing a punch towards the warlord's stomach, only for the man to turn and block it with left arm. Not a bad showing of speed and reflex, but let's see how you handle this, Mihawk challenged before unleashing a barrage of strikes towards Izuku. Izuku did his best to dodge the strikes while also using his Logia abilities to morph his body out of the way from the strikes. This is getting me nowhere, he thought as he continued to dodge. So let's change things up a bit, he thought with a heightened smirk. Squeesh. Everyone's eyes widened as they read and saw Mihawk's attack seemingly land. Izuku, Nami screamed as she and the rest of the crew watched the knife sink lower and lower. She was close to a panic attack when Hawkins spoke up and pointed towards the battle. Wait a minute, look, he instructed. Something's not right, just look at Hawkeye's face. He noticed, and he was right, as Mihawk's eyes had widened in surprise and slight alarm as instead of blood what appeared to be muck as Mihawk sunk up to his wrist in the muck. Seeing his plan work, Izuku gained a smirk. That is the power of the swamp fruit, not the most practical fruit, but it gets the job done. As Mihawk tried to pull himself free, Izuku used the dice fruit to turn the tops of his fingers into rotating saw blades, and before Mihawk the chance to defend himself, punching the warlord square in the face, the blades also cutting away at the man as he flew several feet away after his wrist was freed from the muck. "Yeah, Izuku, that's how you do it," Bonnie cheered with Nami while Kid laughed. "How do you like Warlord? Getting tricked by a rookie and then getting a punch to the face." The magnetic user continued to laugh. The others were smiling as well. They knew this fight was far from over, but it was still motivating to see their captain land a solid blow. Back with the fight, Mihawk let out a grunt as he stood up, wiping the blood from his cheek before making a slashing motion with his knife to rid it of any lingering muck. "Well, you have enough of a warm-up, or do you still want to use your toy of yours?" Izuku taunted, with Mihawk narrowing his eyes before letting out a chuckle as he put away his knife and reached for Yoru. "Very well then, you wish to face this black blade?" Hawkeye asked as he drew his sword. "Then so be it." In an instant the warlord sent several green flying blade attacks towards Izuku, who had to dodge swiftly in order to avoid the powerful attacks, though that was proven easier thanks to his haki, while those on the ship held on so they wouldn't fall overboard. "Damn it, what the hell kind of monster is he?" Law growled under his breath as both he and Kid held on to the sides of the ship while the others quickly made to move the ship so it wouldn't be destroyed as a result. "I don't have a clue, but what I do know is that things are going to get a lot rougher before this gift ends, and there's not a damn thing we can do." Kid growled under his breath, with Law scowling in agreement, hating how powerless they were in this situation. Mihawk continued to send attack after attack, and Izuku was getting sick of dodging. So let's see how he likes it. Sticking his leg out, Izuku used the bloom fruit, and suddenly multiple legs grew out from his knee. Tempest Kick Barrage. Izuku thought as his Tempest Kicks collided with Mihawk's flying blade attacks and shielded Izuku from view as Mihawk looked around trying to find him, only to find nothing. If he's not around, then he must be above, the warlord thought, looking, and saw Izuku fire off a fire fist while he responded with a flying blade attack. The two attacks passed each other, and while Hawkeye was engulfed in the fire, Izuku was able to have his arm cut off by using the power of the chop fruit to detach it and avoid the slash. "Damn, that was close," Izuku muttered as he reattached his arm just as something jumped out of the fire, revealing itself to be Mihawk. He had a few burns and his clothes were singed, but other than that he was fine. Izuku was right on him, a haki-powered punch ready to smash the warlord, who was able to guard with Yoru. The resulting clash of haki-powered strikes resulted in a shockwave, shaking the island and sea around it violently as cracks appeared and spread throughout the island as the two fighters were pushed back. Looking around, Izuku saw the damage they were causing. "Well, this has been an absolute blast, and I hate to say it, but if we don't want to deal with any unneeded interruptions, we might want to wrap this up." Izuku truly sad that the fight had to end so soon, a sentiment that Mihawk seemed to share as he nodded almost mournfully at the thought of the fight ending. "Very well, let's finish this duel in the manner it deserves." Mihawk agreed, raising Yoru high in the air ready to unleash his strongest attack yet, while Izuku raised his fist, a large quake bubble forming around it. The world seemed to come to a standstill as the two just stared at each other, neither moving an inch, as if waiting for something to signify the end. That signal came when a random wave crashed innocently against the bank of the shore, just as so many waves have done so and will in the future. But it was enough for them. In an instant the two unleashed their attacks, with Mihawk unleashed his largest and most powerful attack yet that seemed to engulf the world in a green light, while Izuku threw a punch that seemed to crack the entire world in front of him as a gigantic shockwave launched towards Mihawk's strike. When the two attacks met, the world shocked more violently than ever before, resulting in not only the entire island seemed to break apart, but massive-sized waves to rise with the Devil King pirates, holding on for dear life as the Sharon was tossed around violently. "Someone tell me when it's over," Nami shouted, eyes shut tight and clinging to the mainmast for dear life as the others ducked under the edge of the ship and clung desperately to the side, waiting out the chaos. Finally, after what felt like hours, the world seemed to calm again, and slowly and unsurely the crew looked over and saw the results of the fight. The island, which was once fairly large and polluted by tress, flowers and overfauna, had been reduced to little more than a sandbar, with no other remains in sight, having probably been vaporized in the blast. However, the real sight was the two figures lying on their backs, not saying a word and just staring at the sky, watching the clouds pass peacefully, both seemingly lost in sight. With now had visible injuries and were bleeding in a few places but seemed fine, all things concerned. The two remained silent for a few more moments until finally Hawkeye broke it. "Tell me something, Izuku Midoriya. What is your dream?" Hawkeye asked, not bothering to break his eye contact from the clouds. "To become the Pirate King, of course," Izuku said, likewise not breaking eye contact from the sky. "You know, find the One Piece, defeat the Yonko, and maybe beat up an admiral or two," Izuku said, wanting to do everything he ever dreamed of when his first quirk first awakened. Hearing this, Mihawk let a mighty laugh. "Quite a perilous goal. Do you even know what you're getting into or what kind of monsters the four actually are?" the swordsman asked. "Next to nothing. I've got a basic idea of each of their crew, but when it comes to the Yonko themselves, I know very little," Izuku told Mihawk, which could very well be true considering how Nami had the soul fruit, a power which was supposed to belong to one of the four. "I see." Mihawk smirked before looking over to the rest of the Devil Kings who were quickly approaching the island. "And them, what are their dreams?" he asked, with Izuku shaking his head. "Sorry, it's not my place to tell, but they're just as passionate about their goals as I am about mine," Izuku told the warlord, finally setting up with Mihawk doing the same. "I see," was all he offered for a response. Silence once again emerged as the two stood up and watched as the Sharon got closer and closer until when it was just about to arrive, Mihawk turned to Izuku. "Mind if I tag along?" Izuku met Mihawk's gaze as the two stared each other down before Izuku turned away with a smirk. "Sure, why not?" Line break. "So yeah, Hawkeye is not part of the crew," Izuku told the rest of the Devil Kings who were taking the news with various amounts of shock, the sudden development after everything really taking a toll on their nerves. The first to snap out of his shock was Law, who managed a smirk on his face despite the fight. He was still trying to calm himself down. "Well, can't say this is unwelcome, but just to let you know now that you're here except to have a few sparring matches. We've got at least 3 people here with swords, and after seeing everything you're capable of, that's even more reason to spar against someone as strong as you to prepare us for what's to come," Law warned him, with Killer and Hawkins nodding in agreement. This seemed to snap Kid out of his funk and grinned at the man. "Panda Boy's right about that," Kid said while ignoring the rude gesture Law made because of the nickname, as he continued. "Now that we've got a top-tier guy here, there's no reason not to go against him, so we can prepare for the Grand Line. That also goes for you, Captain. Now that we've seen just how strong you are, there's no reason not to go against you as well," Kid said, directing the last part towards Izuku, just no realizing how much his captain held back in their fight. Mihawk only offered a smirk and nod in reply. "I was right about them. In a typical crew, they'd be going on about how they've gained such a powerful crew member, and there's no doubt that's going on in their heads as well," Mihawk admitted. "But all they're talking about is growing stronger, not wanting to be dead weight." Mihawk thought before shaking his head. "Seems I made the right decision after all," he thought before turning to the 3 women. "And what about you 3? Would you care to spare against me as well?" Nami instantly raised her hands while shaking her head rapidly. "Nope, no thanks, I'm good," she said quickly, not even wanting to think about how badly that fight would go for her. Monet and Bonnie also refused, feeling sparring with Izuku would be more beneficial considering how they fight. "If I can ask, Hawkeye, why do you want to join in the first place?" Hawkins spoke up, asking the question that really should have been asked in the first place. "It's well known that for the most part you don't do anything unless it's to kill time. How do we know you just won't abandon us at some point or worse turn against us, not to mention that the government would no doubt strip you of your warlord statues if they found out. So again, why do you wish to join?" The fortune teller questioned, with the rest of the crew looking at the swordsman intently, who was looked to be choosing his words carefully. "A fair question and concern, but this crew has proven from what little I've seen to be different from a lot of different crews out there. Made up of individuals who could have very easily become captains of their own crews but yet have chosen to become part of this one. It truly fascinates me, and I want to see what becomes of this crew firsthand. As for turning on you, well, your captain just proved that he can stand up against me. Though I doubt either of us went all out. As for my warlord statues, well, that was always just to kill some time and so I wouldn't have to deal with the Marines every day. Mihawk admitted and most of the crew nodded, understanding and accepting the answer. Now then, I have a question for you, Mihawk said before looking up to the sails of their ship, much to the confusion of the crew. I understand this is a pirate ship, correct? At this the crew nodded their heads. Then where is your Jolly Roger? Mihawk asked, looking up and seeing blank sails and a blank black flag. Here the crew grew a little sheepish. Well, we wanted to de-iced on a design before we displayed it to the world, Bonnie started to explain. But we couldn't really decide on one. She finished, not looking at the warlord and scratching the side of her face sheepishly. The warlord stared at them for a moment before he actually started to snicker. Seems there's something you lot aren't good at, he told them before shaking his head. Fine, leave the design to me then, he said, getting a raised eyebrow from Kid. Oh, and what, you're some kind of master artist? The redhead questioned, highly skeptical, while Mihawk just smirked. I dabble. Soon the swordsman was sitting at a desk with art supplies around him as he drew what he assured would be the perfect design. He didn't let anyone see it, saying he couldn't concert it with people peering over his shoulder. Finally he stood and wiped his hands clean from the art supplies. All right, come over and have a look. Mihawk gestured over to the crew, who were simply relaxing on the deck, having decided to just stay put for the day. Law was the first one to arrive, and when he saw the design he let out a whistle. Not bad, Hawkeye, not bad at all, he muttered with a smirk as he scratched his chin. A fine design, it will serve us well. Hawkins was the next to arrive. Kid and Killer were next. Well, it'll work, I guess. Kid muttered, impressed against his will, while Killer nodded. It'll help us live up to our name, Killer said. After them came the girls. My, what a fearsome Jolly Roger, Monet said, impressed. Ya might even make a couple of the spineless crews out there piss their pants, Bonnie said, munching on a piece of paper. Nami was the only one pointing. It's fine, but couldn't you have made it a little more cute? She asked, not knowing how to feel about the picture. Izuku was the last to come over, having been watching the horizon, and when he got close Bonnie held up the image. Well, Captain, what do you think? She asked, letting him take in the picture. Izuku was quiet as he took the piece of paper and stared at it for several seconds until finally he smirked. It's perfect. Line break. Well, Nami, are we close? Izuku asked his navigator as they sailed onwards, keeping an eye out for any trace of Loguetown. It had been 5 days since Mihawk had joined the crew, and according to Nami they would soon arrive at Loguetown, where they would resupply and then ship off towards the Grand Line. Mihawk gotten used to the crew quite easily, though he opted to remain hidden whenever they engaged with an enemy, something the rest of the crew agreed to. If the government knew that a now former warlord had joined them, the crew would never get any peace. Nami grinned and gave a thumbs up. Yup, should only be a couple more hours, Nami promised, and would have said more if the sound of something hitting the edge of the ship didn't reach their eyes, causing Nami to sigh. Those idiots are at it again, she muttered, and saw Kid groaning as she shakily got up and charged towards Mihawk, who was sparring with Kid, Killer, Hawkins and Law all at once with Yoru in his hands. Izuku chuckled at the scene. Come on, can you really blame them? I mean, they now have one of the strongest men in the world to spar with whenever they want now. Izuku tried to explain, with Nami sighing. Yeah, I get it, but come on, they've been doing this every day, it's starting to get old, Nami said, annoyed at not only all the noise they're making but the strain they're also putting on the ship if the small cracks in the wood every time a body slams into it is any indication. With Izuku smirking. Aya! The sudden scream came from where Bonnie and Monet had been sunbathing, and quickly the crew had come to see what's wrong. What's wrong? Are we under attack? Nami asked, frantic as the crew looked around for any enemies while Hawkeye and Izuku tried to find anything that could cause them to panic, only for nothing to appear. Okay, Pinky, what's with the screaming? Kid asked, looking down at Bonnie, very annoyed he had to stop the sparring succession for seemingly nothing, only to find Bonnie gasping at something, a piece of paper she was holding, and Monet looking shocked with a hand covering her mouth. Rolling his eyes, Kid snatched the paper from the cook's hands. Is this what's got you so freaked out? Kid demanded, waving the piece of paper in front of their faces. Hey kid, what is it anyway? Nami asked, wanting to know what got the two women in front of them to act like this. Well, let's see, Kid said as he looked down, and see what was causing this entire fuss. Kid looked it over and muttered under his breath so no one could hear what he was saying. After finishing, he nodded and was about to hand it off when it appeared his brain finally registered what he read, jerking back and reading the piece of paper over and over again, seemingly growing more and more pale. Kid, what's wrong? Killer asked, concern clear in his voice as he watched his friend freak out. He didn't respond right away, and the masked man was about to speak again when slowly he looked up and whispered, "We've made it." The rest looked at each other confused before looking back at the man. "Come again?" Law requested, and this time there was an immediate response. "I said," Kid started before a massive grin came to his face. "We've made it." The madman ended with a shout mixed with a laugh as he showed them the piece of paper in his hands. It was a wanted poster. Dead or alive. Izuku Midoriya. 120 million. The crew stared in shock as they stared at their captain's first bounty poster, the picture they used truly frightening. It showed when Izuku had used the stand fruit to summon justice, so the majority of his face was mostly obscured by the mist. However, two parts of him that were visible was his eyes shining an ominous green and a deep scowl. So much for getting into the Grand Line unnoticed. Killer muttered as he scanned the paper, his eyes ultimately always drifting to the huge bounty that was now on his captain's head. "I'll say, the bounty hunters will be coming after us in droves," Law said with a small smirk as Hawkins nodded in agreement. "It's not surprising if you think about it," Mihawk said. "The Marines at least know that you've attacked and destroyed a Navy base, as well annihilated a small fleet. Put on top of that multiple devil fruits, and I'm honestly surprised it's as low as it is." The swordsman finished, looking somewhere between perplexed and amused. By this point, Monet and Bonnie were starting to come out of their shock. "Well, Captain, you sure did grab the government's attention," Monet said while looking towards Izuku, who had taken his wanted poster and kept staring at it while Nami seemed to be frozen in shock. Bonnie meanwhile was sighing while rubbing her head. "Damn it, Izuku, couldn't you have at least waited until we got to the Grand Line before getting us this kind of attention?" The cook as she headed for the kitchen to get to something to eat, but she did have a hidden smile of pride for her captain. Kid just kept laughing, which finally seemed to snap Nami back into reality, as she glared at the redhead. "This isn't funny, Kid," Nami yelled at her crazed crewmate. "Now that this is out in the world, there's no way we won't be hounded 24/7. She continued to scream, getting Kid to finally stop laughing as he smirked at her. "That's why I'm laughing, Orange. All this means is that we'll get to fight stronger enemies sooner, which means we're all bound to bounty sooner or later," Kid told her, practically salivating at the change to get a high bounty on his head, especially now that Izuku has one so high as his starting one. This idiot, Nami said, about ready to fry and burn him with her homies until Izuku finally put the poster down and walked over to the edge of the ship. "Izuku?" Nami asked uncertainty as the captain just stared at the horizon, while everyone, including a now returning Bonnie, stared at their captain unsure. "Hey boss, everything okay?" Kid asked, not understanding why Izuku wasn't extremely happy and proud at his bounty. Izuku was silent for a few seconds more before turning around, and the crew was relieved to see a grin on his face. "Everything's perfect, Kid, especially now that we've just been handed our ticket to getting out of Loguetown without any issue," he said while rolling up his poster. Nami tilted her head in confusion. "What are you talking about, Izuku? How is a bounty going to help us?" she asked, while Monet and Killer did the same, while Kid, Law, Hawkins and Mihawk and Bonnie seemed to have guessed what he had in mind. "Simple, Nami. It means while all of you get what we need for our journey into the Grand Line, I can keep the Marines busy," the green-haired captain revealed, getting nods from most of the crew while Nami opened her mouth to voice her objection to such a reckless plan, before abruptly shutting it as she thought it over. "It's not that bad of a plan. I mean, it could give us a chance to sneak in and gather what we need while Izuku distracts the Marines there. I mean, it's not like there's anyone there that can capture him." Nami thought reluctantly before nodding her head in agreement. "Alright, fine, let's do it, but we have to plan this out before we get there, no playing it by ear," Nami demanded, with the rest of the crew nodding in agreement. "Agreed. We should also plan on what we need to buy before we get there so we can keep our time there to a minimum," Izuku threw out as the crew started putting together a list of what they would need. Food and medical supplies should be our first priority. It'll take us a couple more days to get to Reverse Mountain, and after that there's no knowing how long it is until we reach an island where we can restock. Monet threw out, with Law and Bonnie instantly nodding in agreement, having come to the same conclusion. Some lumber and the like would be good too, Kid suggested. We've been pretty lucky so far in that we've been able to keep our ship pretty much undamaged. But there's no way we'll be able to do that in the Grand Line, and considering we only have 2 people that can swim, I'd rather have all the materials we need to repair the ship so we don't end up sinking in the middle of the ocean. Kid told them seriously, not wanting to die simply because their ship was destroyed. Right, anything else? Nami asked, having added repair supplies to the list she was writing up. Yes, actually I have 2, one a suggestion, the other mandatory. Mihawk spoke, his voice completely serious. The one that we need to get is actually for you, Nami. It's called a log pose, and it's what one actually needs to navigate the Grand Line. Mihawk stated, getting surprised looks from all except Izuku. Really, can't we just use a normal compass? Nami asked, having never heard of a log pose before, as Mihawk shook his head. No, a normal compass is rendered completely useless in the Grand Line due to the special magnetic waves created by each island. The log pose functions by recording the magnetic waves of an island in the Grand Line, and points to that island so the user can travel there. Once on an island for the required amount of time, the recording of the magnetic wave resets, and the needle starts pointing toward the next island. However, the time it takes to lock onto the magnetic waves of the next island varies from island to island. Mihawk finished, with Nami frantically writing down while making a side note to pick up a few backups. And what of the other thing, the one you would suggest we buy? Hawkins asked, thinking of what it could be. That would be a picking up different transponder snails. We won't be able to find any of special ones here, but we should at least be able to pick up a landline and several mini snails near the port. Mihawk suggested, and no one could find a reason not to do it. Alright, anything else? Nami asked, looking around, and was about to put away the list when Izuku spoke. Actually, there might be one more thing, he said before turning to Mihawk. Tell me something, you warlords are allowed to go into marine bases, right? He asked, getting a nod from the swordsman. And you're also allowed to make requests from them, right? Another nod. So if you were to go in and ask for a few prison stone handcuffs. He trailed off, making the hawk-eyed man eyes widen in realization at what his captain was asking of him. How many? He asked, in complete agreement to the plan. 5 or 6 would be idle, but we'll take what we can get, Izuku said, with Mihawk nodding in agreement. If that's the case, then it would probably be best if I go on ahead and get them before you all arrive. It may look suspicious if it were to appear we had arrived at the same time, plus they might ask me to help capture you, Mihawk said, with the rest of the crew nodding in agreement. Agreed, go on ahead, and once you get back, guard the ship and stay out of sight. We're going to try and get out of here as soon as possible, so we'll probably all be gone by the time you get back, Izuku told Hawkeye, with the man nodding. Understood. With that, the Devil King pirates spent the rest of their time planning out their plan while going over what they knew about the city, doing everything they could to make sure their plan went as smoothly as possible. Line break. Well, so far so good, Izuku thought as he and Kid walked through the town, acting as tourists wanting to see the gallows where Roger was killed. The plan so far was working, from Mihawk leaving on his small ship early to hopefully get the cuffs to the crew dividing up to get all the supplies they had discussed, with Izuku heading off to the plaza to cause a distraction with Kid there to back him up if he needed it. How much further is this place? Kid asked as the two had been walking for nearly 45 minutes and still haven't come across it. Relax, from what the people we've asked told us it should be right up here, Izuku finished as the two at last arrived at the plaza and, more importantly, the scaffolding. The two approached in silence, as if the landmark in front of them demanded a moment of silence from the two of them, and they couldn't do anything but oblige until at last they were mere feet from it. So this is it, huh? The place where Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, died, Kid said, looking up at it, his eyes full of respect as he could only guess what was going through Roger's head during his last few moments of life. Izuku nodded now, for more than ever wishing he could have met the legend. It's incredible, isn't it? A voice said, knocking them out from their thoughts as they turned and saw Law walking up to them, bags in hand. 20 years ago, this is where the man who conquered the Grand Line was put to death. Law chuckled as he handed Izuku the bags who put them into his castle. Really makes you think, doesn't it? The doctor asked as the three men continued to look up at the platform. Yeah, Izuku said with a shake of his head. But now it's time to get to work, Izuku said looking at his crew who nodded. So the Marines have taken the bait? Law said looking around carefully and saw a few Marines try to quietly move around them as well as some movement from the surrounding buildings. Yeah, but there's only 3 of them that could cause us problems. This was slightly concerning to Izuku because the only prominent Marines that should be here were Smoker and Tashigi, and even then Tashigi was pretty weak at this point. Well then, guess I should get this show started, Izuku said, getting grins from the 2 men as he crouched down before jumping high in the air, easily reaching the platform as he stared at the sights in front of him. Now, this is a view, Izuku said, slightly amazed at it. So this is the last thing the king of the pirates saw before he died. Incredible, Izuku thought, wanting nothing more at the moment than to take in the view. Unfortunately, he didn't get the chance. Hey you, what the hell do you think you're doing up there? A voice shouted, and Izuku looked down to see a citizen and many others looking up at him with various emotions ranging from confusion to anger, though from the few Marines he could see were sweating, no doubt having already put together who he was. Show time, Izuku thought as a mocking grin appeared on his face, that only seemed to worsen the expressions on everyone's faces. What am I doing? I'm seeing what Gold Roger saw when he died, Izuku stating it like it was obvious. It's only appropriate after given how I'm the next king of the pirates, don't you think? He asked as the crowd looked up at him like he was crazy. Wait a minute. A man from the crowd stuttered, getting everyone's attention as he shakily pointed towards Izuku. I've seen him before, yeah, it was on a wanted poster. His name is Izuku Midoriya and his bounty is 120 million. The man yelled, and upon hearing the enormous bounty it was the final straw for the citizens who ran away, terrified for their lives as some of the Marines tried to calm them down only to be trampled by the panicking civilians. Nodding, Izuku jumped down and joined his crew on the ground. Well, that was fun, and the rest of the crew should be done by now, so let's head back to the ship, the young captain suggested, with Law and Kid nodding in agreement. Hold up, none of you are going anywhere, a gruff voice said from the crowd as 2 figures emerged from it as Marines now appeared from every angle. The first was a muscular, white-haired and brown-eyed man. He wears a large, thick white and blue specialist marine jacket which he keeps open, with greenish fur lining the neck, wrists, and hem. The jacket bears the kanji for justice written on the back of it. Many cigars are strapped to the jacket, and 2 in his mouth. He carries a jit on his back. He also wears brown leather gloves, blue jeans with a brown belt, and large military-issue brown leather boots. The second was a normal-sized woman who had dark brown eyes and wears her black hair between chin and shoulder length. She wears rectangular glasses with red frames. She was wearing blue jeans and black shoes along with a green shirt and blue jacket. Izuku, upon seeing them, let a grin come across their face. Smoker and Tashigi, huh, and looking like they did before they entered the Grand Line? Makes sense, Izuku said, holding in a laugh. In almost any other situation we'd be on the same side, Izuku thought while shaking his head. What a shame, were his last thoughts before he addressed the Marine captain. So you must be the Smoker, the White Hunter. What does a Marine captain want with a rookie like me? Izuku asked, and Smoker's face became a scowl. Don't play dumb with me, pirate. You saw the kind of panic you caused. There's no way I'll let you get out there and cause more chaos, Smoker declared, drawing his jit and pointing it towards the 3 pirates who prepared to fight. Oh yeah, and how do you plan to do that? Izuku asked, trying to sound as arrogant as possible and piss Smoker off. It seemed to have worked, if the growl that came from him was any indication. Like this, men, capture them, Smoker ordered, having realized Kid and Law were pirates, while the Marines in the plaza charged forward while the ones in the buildings aimed their rifles at the 3. Well, this is a mess, Law asked, looking around lazily before looking towards Izuku. Any ideas, Captain? Izuku nodded with a smirk. Just sit back and watch, he told the 2 as he casually started walking forward. The Marines were mere inches away from Izuku when it happened. Izuku closed his eyes for a moment, and then upon opening them unleashed an incredible burst of conqueror's haki that engulfed the entire area. In an instant the large group of Marines were hitting the ground unconscious, some even falling out of the buildings they were stationed in. When the blast finally let up, only Smoker and Tashigi were still conscious, and even then Tashigi was on her knees drenched in sweat and staring off in a daze, while Smoker had to take a knee, was breathing heavily, and had some sweat dipping off him. Law and Kid just walked up to their captain in amazement, having never seen something like that before. "Okay, seriously, what the buck was that?" Kid asked, the two having felt a kind of pressure bearing down on them even though it wasn't directed towards them. Hearing the question, Izuku turned around the answer. "That was haki, or rather on form of haki. Something that is going to be absolutely necessary for the later half of the Grand Line. Which is why I'll start training the crew in it once we get into the Grand Line, with maybe Hawkeye lending a hand," Izuku said as the two grinned, having heard the word after Izuku's fight with Hawkeye, and now eager and excited to learn to do it themselves. You're not going anywhere," Smoker spoke through clenched teeth as he shakily stood up before using the power of the plume fruit to turn himself into smoke and launch his upper torso forward, raising his jit into the air, ready to use the sea prism stone in the tip to take away Izuku's devil fruit powers. Unfortunately for the Marine, Izuku saw it going and quickly sidestepped to right to avoid the weapon, before haki up his arm, grabbing Smoker by the face before slamming him into the ground with such power that it left the man gasping for breath while knocking the jit out of his hand, which Izuku Kiyaki grabbed before slamming it into Smoker's head, knocking the man out. Seeing the man unconscious, Izuku turned to his crew. "And that is another example of haki, getting through the natural defenses of devil fruits," Izuku told them before looking at the weapon jit. "Not a bad weapon, not my style. You guys want it? There's C-tone in the tip that nullifies devil fruit powers?" he asked, with the two raising their eyebrows. "And you know this how?" Kid asked, with Izuku just shrugging. "It's actually not that hidden. Before me and Nami meet you, we ran into a group of pirates that had a devil fruit user. Said that they had been to Loguetown and ran into Smoker, and that his powers had been cancelled once the weapon touched him, and there's only so many things that can cancel devil fruits." Izuku finished his lie, opting to keeping it simple while brining in Nami to it later in case she was asked. Actually, Nami could probably use this, Izuku thought. Law and Kid both seemed to accept this and dropped the issue. "Fine then, now that the Marines are out of the way, let's get the buck out of here before anything else happens," Kid said as the trio started heading for the port. "Unfortunately for you gentlemen, it's already too late for that." Only to instantly stop as a new figure appeared in front of them. He was a man of average height and well built. His most distinctive feature is his handlebar mustache. His hair is black and straightly combed. He wore a yellow and black striped suit over a dark red shirt with an orange tie. He wears a marine coat hanging from his shoulders like a cape, with a sword at his side. The man looked at the three with a quiet intensity as he observed the trio in front of him. Kid and Law were both ready to fight, but there was some anxiety within them, as even without haki they could tell this man was no joke. Izuku just stood there with his arms crossed, jit on his back as he watched, ready to stop anything the man in front of him. "Do you three know who I am?" the man asked, finally breaking the tense silence. Kid and Law shocked their heads. They could tell he was a high-ranking Marine, but they didn't know him specially. Izuku, however, did. "You're Vice Admiral Stainless. We talked once before," Izuku told the man, who nodded. "Indeed, though I didn't know at the time I was speaking to a man who would gain infamy so quickly," Stainless said, keeping his voice mostly natural though there was tone of anger in it. "So why are you here, going to try and take me in now before I get to the Grand Line?" Izuku asked, with Stainless nodding. "Yes, your first bounty being so high proves how dangerous and why you need to be captured," the Vice Admiral said, drawing his sword. "As well as the rest of your crew," he declared as Law drew his sword and Kid created his golem arms. But before they could attack, Izuku was already on the move. With lighting covering his arms, Izuku threw a punch, launching two giant bolts of electricity at great speeds towards the Marine, who raised his sword and covered it with haki to try and defend against the strike. Which is why it came as a great surprise when the lighting seemed to bend around him, as if purposely avoiding the Marine. Though Stainless had no time to think about thought as his haki flared to life before he spun around only for it to be too late as two more Izukus appeared out of the lighting and launched haki-powered punches towards the Vice Admiral, and while he may have been able to block them with his sword, the force behind the strikes were able to send Stainless flying back towards the original who had a 10% one-for-all powered punch waiting for him. And the strike rang true as upon contact Stainless went flying, crashing through several buildings and houses and well away from the pirates. "How that's what you get when you mess with us, you mustached bastard!" Kid yelled, hoping that his taunt was someone heard from the downed marine. "Enough, we need to get moving. There's no way that punch would keep a vice admiral down for long," Izuku ordered with Law and Kid nodding in agreement as the three proceeded to leave the square. However, as they were running, Izuku couldn't help but feel he was being watched and turned to where he felt the source was. Izuku couldn't keep his eyes from widening slightly when he found the source. "I complete forgot he was here." Izuku though, as he saw the man staring back at him in wonder and amazement. He was a light-skinned, tall and lean yet muscular man. He had no eyebrows. He has a demonic-looking face, sharp fangs, and a ring piercing on his nasal septum. There are 2 lines tattooed under his right eye that curve towards his ear. He has a dark tattoo on his chest of a thick ring with an opening on the top, wings on the sides, and long fangs on the bottom. He was wearing a yellow and red vertically striped coat with tan fur around the neck. He also had brown pants and a black belt. His hair was slicked back in a pompadour style. Bartolomeo. Izuku thought as the man continued to stare at him in wonder even as Izuku turned around and continued to run forward with his crew. "Sorry Luffy, looks like I may have taken your number 1 fan," Izuku thought before turning his full attention back to moving forward. "Hey guys," the 3 turned to see Bonnie running up besides them, multiple bags on her arms. "So everything go well for you guys too?" she asked with a grin, clearly having heard all the noise in from the plaza. "As well as can be expected," Izuku answered with a nod. "Right, anyway, I'm pretty sure everyone else is done with their assignments and back at the ship getting it ready, so we just need to hurry up and meet them there," the cook instructed, getting nods from the men as they picked up the pace. True to Bonnie's word, everyone else was already there, and was just about done with the preparations when the 4 had arrived. "Excellent work everyone, I couldn't ask for a better crew," Izuku praised, getting smirks and nods from the others. "Now then, is there anything else we need to do, or are we ready to sail out?" Izuku asked, getting headshakes from the others. "Nope, we're all ready to go," Nami cheered, getting a grin from Izuku. "Well then, set sail," Izuku shouted, getting in, "Yeah," from the crew as the Sharon slowly left the port so they could finally enter the place where they would finally achieve their goals. The Grand Line. Line break. Smoker could only glare and grit his teeth as he watched the pirates' ships sail into the distance. "Get me a ship, I'm going after them," Smoker ordered, and one of his subordinates was about to do just that when a slightly bleeding Stainless appeared. "Belay that order, you Captain. Smoker will remain here," the Vice Admiral ordered, absolute authority in his voice. "But sir," Smoker started, only to be cut off by Stainless. "But nothing you've done will at keeping pirates from entering the Grand Line as well as protecting Loguetown. We need you here," Stainless explained. "But what about Devil King and the rest of his crew?" Smoker asked, hating the fact he was taken out by the pirates. "Don't worry about that, Smoker. I shall deal with Devil King Izuku Midoriya myself," Stainless declared before heading towards his ship, ready to hunt down this new threat before it could get out of control. Line break. It had been a few days since the crew had left Loguetown, and the crew were currently traveling towards the Twin Capes, the entrance to the Grand Line. Currently the crew was doing their own thing to pass the time while enjoying fruity drinks that Bonnie made. Bonnie and Monet were sunbathing, though Monet joked it was a lost cause for her. Hawkins was currently shuffling his cards and doing various readings while occasionally glancing towards the deck of their ship. Izuku was at the bow of the ship keeping a lookout for any trouble, though he too looked over at the deck of the ship. The reason for this, and the reason why Law, Kid and Killer were watching with full smirks and chuckles escaping them, was Hawkeye currently teaching Nami the basics on how to use her new weapon. At first Nami was ecstatic to get Smoker's now former JIT, and even more so when she found out about the Sea Prism Stone, though he quickly filled her in on the lie he told Kid and Law, which she readily agreed to. All was great in her world until Mihawk saw how she was planning on using it. Not being able to watch such crud strikes and stances, Mihawk took it upon himself to teach her how to use it probably. He's just as big as a taskmaster here as he is in Perona's memories of him, Izuku thought in amusement, recalling the Ghost Princess's memories of Hawkeye training Zoro. Amma and Sue were also watching from around Izuku, and Amma scowled at what it was seeing being done to its creator and queen. Who does he think he is, treating our queen like that? The sun demanded while the cloud just smiled lazily. Hey, now he's only trying to help her, give the man a break. Sue said, not seeing the harsh training as a problem as long as it kept Nami alive. Izuku just listened to the two argue with a smile, before his Haki picked up something quickly approaching the boat, and judging by Hawkeye's suddenly walking up to join Izuku on deck, he sensed it too. Hey, what's wrong? You guys pick something up with that Haki thing of yours? Kid asked, the crew having been given a basic rundown of what Haki was and what it could do. The pair just nodded, and although they were on guard, they weren't overly worried. Even as it shot out of the water and onto the deck and through the water, they finally saw that it was a snake? Bonnie said, looking at the snake search desperately. No, that's not just any snake. Izuku already rubbing his temples as he tried to fight the headache that was about to come on. That's Salome. Nami raised her eyebrow at the name. And just why are we supposed to know who she is? The navigator asked while it was Mihawk who answered. Because she's the pet of the pirate Empress Boa Hancock. He answered, leaving the rest of the crew shocked at the information. However, before anything else could be said, the snake finally spotted them and practically lunged towards them. Please, please, you gotta help me. The snake pleaded, with Izuku actually being able to understand it thanks to the whisper fruit. Yeah, I know that's technically not how it works, but let's face it. It's the devil fruit that lets you talk with animals. If ever is a fruit that lets someone directly talk to animals, I'll come back and change it. Calm down and then tell me what happened, Izuku ordered, with the snake doing its equivalent of a nod before taking a few deep breaths. Meanwhile, the crew looked at each other for an explanation, only to shrug at each other, before turning back to the scene. Chalking it up to another devil fruit that's allowing their captain to talk to the snake. Now then, are you calm enough to explain what happened? Salome nodded. I will first, but will you please help my mistress and the rest of the tribe? Please, they're dying, the snake pleaded, looking close to tears as Izuku sighed and got up to face the others. Salome here claims that the Kuja are dying, Izuku told them, getting skeptical looks from the rest of the crew. Oh really, and we're supposed to believe something could come around and wreck a warlord so much that it's killing her without other people noticing? Law drawled, though Hawkeye felt the need to correct something. Ex-warlord, actually, he clarified, getting shocked looks from the rest of the crew. It happened a few weeks ago. No one knows why or what happened, just that one morning that her status had been revoked. Since then there hasn't been any sightings of the Kuja or the Snake Princess. Here Bonnie raised an eyebrow. Okay, if that's the case, then why hasn't it been announced in any of the newspapers? That's pretty important news, the cook asked, with the swordsman closed his eyes. Who knows? Maybe they wanted to wait until they found a replacement. Maybe they didn't want people to ask questions. Here he could only offer a shrug. We just don't know. Kid meanwhile scoffed. Well, who the hell really cares? We don't know the Kuja a damn thing, and even if we do help them, what's to stop them from turning around and killing us? I mean, they're not exactly known for being friendly, especially towards men. Kid finished, making several good points. Kid's right. I mean, why should we help them? It's not like anyone forced them to being pirates. They could have easily just stayed on that island of theirs. Nami interjected, having heard plenty of horror stories about the Kuja, and she didn't want to find out firsthand if they were true. As the crew continued on to voice their complaints, Izuku inwardly sighed, as he reluctantly agreed with them. As much as he wanted to help them, Izuku knew that it would just end up biting them in the ass, when the Amazons eventually recovered. Salome, hearing what they were saying, was becoming more and more desperate. Please, Amazon Lily was attacked and was taken from us, the snake continued to cry. Only a handful of us were able to get away before the island disappeared. We've barely managed to get through the calm belt before the two giant snakes that pulled the ship died. And we're starting to run low on food and medical supplies, so people could start dying any day now if you don't do something. Salome cried, not being able to hold it in anymore. As Izuku relayed the information, The opinions of the Devil Kings didn't change. Kid and Killer still thought it was a bad idea, despite Killer starting to feel bad for Amazons like Nami was beginning to. Monet, Hawkins and Hawkeye didn't really care either way. The world was a big, unfair place, and the Kuja were just unlucky, though they, like the rest of the crew, were curious what the snake meant when she said the island disappeared. However, Law and Bonnie had both stiffened up to the point they were resembling statues. Both no doubt remembering their past, with Law having to watch his friends and family die either by Amber Lead syndrome or by being killed by the world government, while Bonnie no doubt remembering her childhood in the streets struggling to get by as she desperately searched for food. "Well, what do you two think?" Izuku asked the two, shaking them out their thoughts before they looked at each other, and must have come to some kind of agreement, as they both nodded before facing the rest of the crew. "We need to go and help them," Law said, with Bonnie nodding. "If they're dying like the snake said, we need to do something," the doctor told them. Kid was very much against this. "Are you two out of your damn minds?" the metal manipulator roared, stalking up close to them. "What the hell could make you want to go and help them, and when they're likely to just stab us in the backs after they're back up and running?" Kid shouted, his face so close to Law's that Kid's goggles were pushing against Law's hat. Law's face was as cold as ice and set in stone. "I have my reasons." He was all he offered, his tone of his voice matching his face. "As for them stabbing us in the back." Here he trailed off before facing Hawkins. "Hawkins, what are the chances of the Amazons attacking us after we help them?" he asked the fortune teller, who calmly went to work. After a few seconds of consulting his cards, he looked up. "Chances of misfortune 4%. He reveled, getting Kid to scoff, while Law just crossed his arms with a raised eyebrow, though Bonnie interjected before anything could be said. "Look, we're wasting time just sitting here squabbling, so how about this? We go to their ship and help them, but before we do, Izuku and I turn them into their little kids. That way, even if they do turn on us, we'll be facing a bunch of brats instead of full-grown pirates," Bonnie suggested, and Kid actually stopped to think about it, and found it wasn't that bad of a plan. Monet, seeing the redhead starting to crumble, decided to help Bonnie out. "Also, we have prison stone handcuffs now. I heard the Snake Princess and her sisters had devil fruit powers. We put the cuffs on them and there's no way they could put up a fight." The Snow Woman finished, getting a grateful nod from the glutton, which she returned with a smile. Kid, looking around, saw that the rest of the crew was convinced, even Killer and Nami, so after letting out a small growl, he sighed as palmed the side of his face in annoyance. Fine, let's go help them," he grumbled. "But at the first sign of trouble we chuck them into the ocean, right?" he asked, getting a chuckle from Izuku. "Right," the captain confirmed, getting a nod from the redhead as Izuku turned to face Salome. "Looks like we're in, so where to?" Izuku asked the snake, who looked beyond relieved. "Oh, thank you so much," the snake cried. "Now the ship is south by southwest." The snake told Izuku, who nodded as he relayed the directions to Nami and the rest of the crew, who quickly went about to follow the directions. As this was going on, Izuku stood at the front of the ship, eyes peeled for enemies, all the while wondering if he had made the right decision. Line break. "Well, that ship's seen better days," Killer muttered as they had finally reached the Kuja ship, and like Killer had said, the ship was in desperate need of repairs. From the sails being burned, the paddle wheels being destroyed, the cabin looking close to collapsing in on itself, and the two giant dead snakes at the front were just some of the damages of the ship. "Right, let's do this," Izuku told his crew. "Hawkeye, use your hockey to find any of the Kuja while Bonnie turns them back into children, while the rest of you bring them back to Law, who will be waiting in the medical bay. Once you drop someone off, head back to get someone left," Izuku ordered, getting nods from the crew, though Kid raised an eyebrow. "And just what will you be doing when we're hauling these women?" the madman asked, with Izuku holding up 3 pairs of prison stone handcuffs. "I'm to follow Salome, who's going to lead me to the Snake Sisters. We have no idea what kind of mindset they have right now. Figured it would be best I handled them alone," Izuku explained, getting nods from the crew. "Whatever you say, boss," Kid said before a smirk came to his face as he nudged his captain in his side. "Just remember, we're here to help them, not sweep them off their feet," Kid said with a laugh as he ignored the annoyed look on Nami, Bonnie and Monet's face. "Alright people, let's move." Izuku ordered as his crew boarded the Kuja's ship to look for survivors. This way, hurry, Salome said as she led Izuku down to where Boa and her sisters were being hidden. In a couple minutes the two were in front of a hidden door. You sure they're beyond this door? Izuku asked the snake as his haki did pick up life behind the door, though instead of 3 signals there was 4. All Salome did was nod frantically. All right then, Izuku said as he put his hands on the door and slid the door opened. Only to instantly shooting his hand out to grab a staff that was aimed of his hand as an elderly woman's voice was heard above him. Don't you dare move, I don't know who you are, but you're not getting anywhere near the girls. The woman roared as she landed from her jump and came into view. She was remarkably diminutive in height, with very thick lips, and is wrinkled from old age covered in bruises and cuts. She also wears some kind of sea green bubble belt apparently meant to hold up the spotted print short skirt that all Kuja wear that was torn and sloppy patched back together in what was a clearly rushed job. Also like most Kuja, she wears a cape though it was torn and held barely hung over her shoulders. Her hair is white but dirty and she wears a weathered pink flower hung limply on the left side of her head. Additionally, her snake weapon is colored purple and acts as her staff and the upper body of the snake is curled up. Elder Nyan. Izuku though as he watched the woman prepare for another strike. Now then, are you going to leave peacefully or am I going to have to make you leave? Elder Nyan or Gloriosa asked, threateningly ready to bash the man standing in front of her. However, Izuku just pointed to his right side and to her shock she saw Salome there looking nervously into the room trying to see if her mistress was all right. Salome, Nyan shouted shocked as she went up to examine the snake to make sure she was all right. Why are you back? I thought you went off to get he. Here she stopped mid-sentence as she slowly and carefully looked towards Izuku. You were the one Salome found? She asked, getting a nod from the boy. And you came to help us? Another nod. Why? And how did Salome even communicate with you? Nyan asked, very guarded, thought not nearly as much since Salome seems relaxed next to him. It was a devil fruit that allowed me to communicate with the snake. Izuku answered, simply getting a nod from Nyan, having figured it was something like that. As for why, well, Boa Hancock may be a warlord, but she is a pirate at the end of the day, and we've got to stick together against the Marines. Not to mention my cook and doctor were rather insistent. Izuku told her, not wanting to spook the elder woman by revealing he knew of Hancock's revoked statues. However, he must have said something wrong as the older woman did stiffen up considerably. I see, thank you then. She must have truly desperate for someone to help them because she turned and was about to let him in but put her staff up before he could move. Before you go in, you need to know you're about to see something that the Snake Princess and her sisters have kept hidden their entire lives. Nyan spoke very seriously and Izuku knew at once she was talking about the slave tattoos. So please, I'm begging you, keep what you see to yourself. The old woman pleaded, looking truly desperate. Understandable if given the state of everything. Izuku merely nodded and Nyan let him pass, and once Izuku could clearly see into the large room. He had a short intake of breath as an intense wave of fury enveloped him. Those bastards! Izuku thought, clenching his hands tightly as he took in the sight in front of him. The 3 sisters were indeed there, but they were in incredibly bad shape. Cuts and bruises littered their bodies as dried blood splotches riddled them as well. Burns as well as what appeared to be multiple bullet wounds covered their bodies, and they were clearly showing signs of not having eaten in days. Their hair had been cut in a clearly mangled fashion, and with their noses bloody and each of their eyes have been blacked. However, the worst part was that they had each been chained up with sea prison stone, and stripped naked so that their slave brands were on full view to the world. Not being able to take it, Izuku immediately activated the stand fruit and summoned Crazy Diamond. Ignoring the shocked gasp from Gloriosa, he instantly sent the stand to work and to healing the trio. Except nothing happened. What the hell? Izuku though, shock coursing through his body as the stand tried again and again to heal each of the girls, only for nothing to happen. Recalling the stand, Izuku immediately turned to Gloriosa. Granny, what the hell happened? Those 3 should be healed by now, Izuku demanded, with Nyan looking towards him just as shocked. So that weird thing was trying to heal them but couldn't? She asked, getting a shake of the head no from Izuku, causing the ancient Amazon to clench her fist. Damn it, then it must be her doing, Nyan growled under her breath. And just who is her? Izuku, but only getting a shake of the head as an answer. No time to explain, we just got to find a way to get them down and get to your ship. Nyan explained before rushing over to the three but stopped when she noticed Izuku hadn't moved. What are you doing over there? Get over here and help me. She trailed off as she watched with wide eyes as wax appeared in Izuku's hand before morphing into 3 separate keys. Nyan stood there gasping as she stared wide-eyed at the display of someone wielding 2 devil fruits. Before she could ask the obvious, Izuku interjected. Now's not the time for questions, we both have questions and we can answer each other later. Izuku said as he ran over to the girls before throwing her the keys to Marigold's cuff. He quickly went to work working on Boa's chains, followed quickly by Sonia's. Once all 3 were down, Nyan spotted the next problem. Okay, now we gotta move them. Why don't you go get some of your crew and see if they can? She trailed off as she noticed 3 pink spheres in his hand. Another one? She thought, shocked, but before she could voice it, he shot out and hit the 3 women. Gloriosa watched with widening eyes as the 3 continued to shrink. No, not shrink. Nyan thought as she watched. They're growing younger, she thought, until they looked to be around 5 years old as Izuku covered them with a worn-out blanket that was in the room before gently picking them up. Come on, let's go, Izuku said, causing the older woman to smile for the first time in a long time before she jumped before planting herself square on his shoulder. Right, let's do it, she said, causing Izuku to nod and walk out of the room with Salome. Before coming abruptly to a stop, Nyan had to grab the back of Izuku's head to avoid falling off. Why in the world would you possibly stop? She screamed into his ear, with Salome trying desperately to calm the woman down, only to shrink back when Gloriosa glared at her menacingly. Carefully putting the trio down so their backs were facing the ceiling, the elder jumped down while he went back into the room where the sounds of things being moved around and flipped through could be heard. What the hell is he doing in there? Nyan wondered while making sure the girl's condition didn't worsen. A few seconds later, Izuku emerged holding 3 pieces of paper in his hand. Gloriosa was about to ask what he was planning when a green glow covered his right index finger before raising it into the air, as the glow extended to the paper, with the papers now floating in the air. Slowly the papers flew over the Gorgon's sisters' back before they covered the slave mark and fitted themselves firmly onto their backs. Nyan continued to stare on, confused, until before the elder's eyes the mark appeared on the pieces of paper, and with one flick of his wrist the papers flew off the girl's back and burned to ash. Gloriosa watched as the papers burnt before slowly turning back to the 3 girls, back to where the girl's slave mark should be. Only to find nothing there. You removed the marks, she said quietly and absolutely disbelievingly as the Izuku carefully bent down, covered them back up and picked them up carefully. Yeah, I did, Izuku said. That was thanks to the power of the nin fruit, model, specialist. This fruit allowed the user to gain the abilities and power of a specialist nin user. The ability he used was called paste. It allowed him to move an image from one surface to another so long as they're touching. At the disbelieving look he was getting from the snake and elder, he sighed, annoyed. What can I say? Been through a lot of crap recently, thought they could use a break, Izuku said before heading back to the ship. Nyan and some continued to gap before looking at each other, as truly happy and grateful grins appeared on their faces as they followed behind him. Unknown to the 3, however, there was someone else watching, as from the bundle a pair of sea green eyes opened, brimming with tears as she looked at Izuku with sincere gratitude before closing her eyes and drifting off to be asleep. Line break. Well, I've done what I can, now we just have to wait for them to properly recover, Law said, coming out of his office to the deck where his crew, Salome, and Nyan was waiting, with the older woman sighing in relief. Thank you, she said, sounding like the world had been lifted off her shoulders. I'm sorry we're causing you all this trouble, she said, with Salome hissing in agreement. No problem, and thank you for let us put the sea prism stone handcuffs on the Gorgon sisters, Law said, with Nyan nodding. It was a reasonable request, and their captain already proved trustworthy, so it wasn't that big of a deal if it meant saving everyone. In total they had 30 Kuja on board, complete, taking up the med bay. 10 Kuja pirates if you counted the Gorgon sisters, and about 20 islanders. 30 Kuja, Nyan thought sadly. That's all we could save, the elder thought. Seeing the look, Izuku sighed. Okay, Look, I think it's time we got some answers. We need to know what happened, the young captain said with elder nodding, not having anything else to do but wait at this point. We already know from Mihawk that Hancock had been dismissed from the warlords and that the government is keeping quiet about it. Here Nyan nodded before glancing briefly towards the swordsman. It had been quite a shock to see him on board. So what happened to cause the government to revoke her status? Izuku asked, causing the elder to look down. Because the Snake Princess was living up to her side of the deal, Nyan answered. No matter what the government asked of her, she never did it, always blowing off while she demanded more and more. It didn't help that the government kept giving in to those demands, she explained before letting out a sigh. However, the tipping point was plain to see. The warlords had been summoned to put down a vast pirate coalition of more than 200 pirate crews. All but the Kuja pirates went, no matter how I tried to talk her into going, and the result was the loss of over a dozen islands and countless lives. Gloriosa looked down in shame, having never felt more ashamed of Hancock's actions than she had been there. Nami raised an eyebrow. And that's when the government revoked her status and attacked your island? The navigator asked, but eeped. When the elders gripped her snake staff tightened significantly, and her hair covered her eyes. Yes, that was when Hancock lost her warlord statues, but they aren't who attacked the island, she revealed, shocking the crew. Even Mihawk was surprised. Then who? Bonnie asked, trying to think. Who could possibly cause so much damage to the crew of a warlord? Bonnie asked, unable to think of pretty much anyone who could do it. However, Elder Nyan answered showed just how small she and the rest of the crew truly was thinking, and proved just how big and brutal the world they were getting themselves into was with just two simple words. Big Mom. Reliving the past and moving towards the future. You can't be serious, was the first thing out of Kid's mouth after Gloriosa made her big reveal, causing the elderly woman to glare at him. You have a problem with what I just said, brat? She asked, her voice low and dangerous as Kid glared right back. Yeah, I do. You honestly accept us to believe that Yonko's crew, even if it was a small section of it, was able to cross all the way through the Grand Line and wage war with a warlord and no one heard anything about it, including the Marines? Kid demanded, highly skeptical of the whole thing, something that was starting to be shared with the rest crew now that the shock was wearing off, though Mihawk looked somewhat convinced. Nyan just glared at them. I didn't say it was the Big Mom pirates, I said it was Big Mom herself. She and she alone attacked and stole our island, she said seriously, trying to get the rookies in front of her to understand. Unfortunately, this just made the crew even more skeptical. And just how, may I ask, did she get there? She has to be close to 70 now, right? It doesn't matter who you are, traveling the Grand Line and into the Calm Belt is no easy task. Law interjected this time, having a hard time believing the story. Gloriosa let loose another glare, but it wasn't directed towards Law, and instead it was at Mihawk, who just stared right back with his arms crossed. I'm surprised, Hawkeye. I would have thought you would have told them at least something about what's waiting for them out there. The elderly Amazon grumbled with Mihawk raised an eyebrow. Considering we haven't even entered paradise yet, I felt it unnecessary to mention anything about New World just yet. Mihawk told her disinterestedly, getting Nyan to glare at him, while the others filed those names away for later. Clicking her teeth, Nyan addressed the rest of the crew. Alright, listen up, since some people have decided to keep information from you, Nyan said while directing another glare at Mihawk, who blatantly ignored it. I'll tell you what is known about the current Yonko's strength, though that's vague at best. Nyan muttered, a troubled look in her eyes, while the Devil Kings looked at her in confusion. I'm sorry, but what? Bonnie asked, a little exasperated. We're talking about the strongest, most infamous, and most influential pirates currently out there. How could their strength be hidden? Bonnie demanded, asking the questions that was on everyone's mind. Nyan didn't flinch as she shook of the claim. Tell me something, dear. Have you ever heard any rumors about how the Yonko fight, or what kind of abilities they possess? She asked the cook, despite already knowing the answer, while Bonnie thought over any information she had heard about the emperors before shaking her head no. How about the rest of you, ever heard anything? Nyan asked, getting the rest of the crew to shake their heads. Well, that's to be expected. Nyan sighed, getting up from the barrel she had been sitting on, and starting to pace. Even in the Grand Line, very little information is known about them. Even the Navy knowns doesn't know what they are exactly, only their crews known exactly what they're called. However, Nyan said, stopping suddenly and facing them, what is known is that the three yonko that do have devil fruits, that being Whitebeard, Big Mom, and Kaido, all have the same type. Nyan revealed, getting shocked looks from the crew. And what kind are they? Hawkins asked, doing his best to keep his voice monotone, but the crew could the shocked and somewhat nervous tone they would have too had they asked. Gloriosa looked at the crew, before looking towards Mihawk, who nodded as if asking something, to which he nodded as the elder took a deep breath before she answered. Awakened. The Devil Kings collectively blinked, not understanding what they just heard especially. You mean to say that they've awakened their devil fruits, right? Izuku asked, trying to make heads or tails of the situation, though that hope died when Nyan shook her head. Not exactly, but the activation method is the same. Nyan revealed, getting more confused looks from the crew as she continued her explanation. Now awakened devil fruits are special because eating them is not enough to access their powers. They must awaken them like all others before having access to their powers. This, combined with the fact that they are still limited by the standard devil fruit weaknesses, makes them a true double-edged sword. The elder revealed, confusing the pirates in front of her. Double-edged sword? Granny, that sounds like a rip-off if you asked me. Kid snorted. And for what, just a slightly stronger than average fruit? Kid asked disdainfully, with too much Nyan's anger at his casual dismissal. Thankfully for her, Mihawk came to her defense. Don't be a fool, Eustace, the awakened class is nothing short of monstrous. Most offer whoever eats them abilities that are a combination of two or more of the classes. Mihawk told the redhead, whose eyes widened at the reveal, but Mihawk wasn't even close to being done. You mentioned earlier that Big Mom shouldn't have been able to cross the New World and much of Paradise so easily. Well, just so we're clear, her body looks to be one of a woman who's in her late 20s to early 30s. Now this really shocked the crew. Whitebeard is the same. Despite being 72 years old, he looks no older than 44. Eternal youth and age manipulation are fairly common among the awakened class. Mihawk said as he watched the full weight of the situation finally seem to sink into his crew. What other abilities do they possess? Nami stuttered, most likely at the thought of having to face those monsters in their prime. A vast array, really. Like I said before, they almost always have a combination of the three types. There's even those that let one rid themselves of their weakness to the sea. Mihawk said, dropping the biggest bomb yet, causing the entire crew to gasp, unable to believe something like that exists, while Mihawk continued. As hard as it is to believe, it is true. There's a reason why Whitebeard is called the King of the Sea. He's been documented to controlling the sea, creating massive storms, and even summoning and controlling sea kings and other massive aquatic beasts. The swordsman told his now very shaken crew. Izuku in particular, due to the fact that someone other than Shirahoshi can control the sea kings. Nyan just nodded solemnly. Yes, young ones, that's the kind of strength you need to prepare to face when dealing with one of the yonko. She said, looking down sadly, no doubt recalling the events that happened at Amazon Lily. Seeing this, the crew stared at each other, as if having a silent debate, and judging by their expression it was a heated one. Finally, as if coming to an agreement, and a resigned sigh from Nami and Monet, who seemed against it, nodded towards Izuku, who carefully approached the elder, though he didn't get more than 2 steps before she looked back up at them and observed them all before sighing. Let me guess, you kids want to know what exactly happened at Amazon Lily, right? She asked and grunted when they all nodded their heads. Well, I can't really blame you loading you all down with this new information. Here she took a deep breath as she mentally prepared herself. Very well, let me tell you the story. Flashback. Please, Snake Princess, call the Marines back and see if you can work out a deal. Gloriosa pleaded as she trailed behind Boa Hancock to her throne room, followed by Boa Marigold and Boa Sandersonia, both of whom had worried expressions on their faces. Hancock, on the other hand, just scoffed as she entered the room and taking a seat on Salome, while taking a glass of wine one of her servants had gotten for her. Nonsense, those fools in the government will never revoke my title, my beauty wouldn't allow it, Boa stated as she took a sip of her wine. Please, sister, think about your people here if you don't do something, Sonia begged her older sister, with Mari nodding in agreement before adding in her own thoughts. Indeed, remember all Kuja are considered pirates, sister, not just the ones that go out to sea. The sisters tried to convince their older sibling even though they understood where she was coming from. Both hated the government almost as much if not as much as their elder sibling due to their past as slaves. This along with their hatred of men made it difficult for the government to do anything. Add in the fact the government were not only afraid of the Kuja's powers due to the last empress and the Marines constantly fawning over their sister's beauty the Kuja were able to get away with as well as get a lot more with than other warlords were able to. However, everyone had their limits, and it seems that the Marines had finally reached theirs because that morning the island received a call from the Marine commander and Chief Kong himself. The call was less than a minute long, just long enough to inform the Kuja that the pirate empress has lost her status as well as all protections and privileges that came with it before disconnecting before any questions could be asked. Hancock just scoffed and stated it would be less than a day before the government came called back begging and groveling for her to return, a sentiment that was soon picked up by the other Kuja islanders and pirates except for Elder Nyan and the younger Boa sisters who knew the government back. Hancock just sighed patiently at her younger sister's concerns. Sisters, you know how fragile the government is. They would never allow themselves to lose one of their dogs over something as trivial as this. She claimed with nearly snarling at having to refer to herself as a dog before scoffing and waving her hand dismissively. Besides, even if that was the case, it's not as if they have any way to destroy us without taking heavy casualties themselves. Boa claimed with Nyan looking at her, as if she lost her mind. You can't be serious, Snake Princess. The world government has multiple ways to destroy us with them barely having to lift a finger. A buster call. The current 3 admirals are all powerful Logia users who could bombard us from a distance, or heavens forbid they send someone such as the great staff officer Tsuru. The current fleet admiral Buddha Sengoku, or even the hero of the Marines Garp the Fist himself. Gloriosa tried to warn, knowing that the Snake Princess, while extremely powerful, had little chance of whining against the admirals and absolutely no chance against the likes of Garp, Tsuru, or Sengoku. Hancock just rolled her eyes and opened her mouth to respond when she, as well as everyone on the island, felt an immense power suddenly appeared, flaring the entire island's hockey to life. Rushing to the palace balcony, Hancock, her sisters, Elder Nyan and everyone else on the island stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed as a massive portal opened above the island, allowing a single figure to emerge and slowly descend down to where Hancock was while completely ignoring hundreds of arrows being aimed at them. And it was when they were face to face that Hancock could properly see the intruder. She was a very large woman, standing at 29 feet tall and quite slim. Her hair was long, had a similar appearance to that of Sonia's hair, while also having a large strand of hair falling to the left side of her face. She wore a dark fedora with a polka dot pattern, a bandana, and a dark, polka-dotted top with a captain's coat draped over her shoulders with long brown pants and a sword strapped to her back. This was Charlotte Linlin, aka Big Mom, captain of the Big Mom Pirates and one of the Yonko. Big Mom looking down and grinned at seeing the terrified looks on the Kuja's faces as well as the nervous and sweating look on Hancock's face as she bit her nails and desperately tried to think of a plan. Mama, sorry if I scared anyone here, but I have business with your queen and figured it was best to just drop on by. The Emperor laughed while the younger Snake sisters looked desperately at their older sister, silently begging her to act respectful this one time. Fortunately, she either got the message or came to the same conclusion that angering the woman in front of them wasn't wise. And just what kind of business do you have with me? Boa asked, hating how she had to be nice to this outsider regardless of who she was. Big Mom's grin grew bigger as she bent down until she was just about eye level with the Snake Empress. Right down to business, eh? Well, I can respect that. The Yonko laughed. To put it simply, Snake Princess, I want Amazon Lily to become part of Tata Land. Big Mom revealed her reasoning, getting shocked looks from not only the 4 on the balcony but also all the Kuja listening in. Gloriosa was the one who managed to find her voice first and decided to speak on her Empress's behalf. And why would you want us to join your empire, Big Mom? The elder asked before flinching as the Emperor turned her gaze to the elder Kuja. Not that we're not honored, of course, but we don't exactly have much to offer you. Nyan explained quickly, not wanting to piss off the strongest woman in the world. Fortunately, it seemed to work as Linlin merely let out a chuckle, speaking. True, this little place is hardly worth the island it's leached itself onto. She started while the Kuja pirates who had come back to their senses had to bite their tongues in order to stop themselves from saying something damning or stomping some islanders from doing the same. Nyan herself was nervously glancing back at Hancock, who was grinding her teeth and trembling, barely holding in her rage, while her sister, clearly frustrated by the remarks, were trying to clam her down. However, I do hear that this island knows who to make some positively divine dishes, and I just couldn't resist making them my own. The Charlotte matriarch explained, a bit of droll coming out of her mouth just from thinking about the food before wiping it away and clearing her throat and head. Anyway, that's my offer. You supply me with some of those exquisite dishes while coming under my command, and I offer you my protection. Big Mom proposed, with Nyan trying to figure out a way to explain their current situation without angering her. Don't be absurd, you miserable old hag. Nyan could feel every last bit of her freeze at hearing the Snake Princess's words. Even more so, she saw Big Mom's face darken and vines bulge in her head as she slowly turned her gaze to the warlord, who was in her signature pose at pointing towards the emperor while glaring high into the air. We Kuja will never submit and be rolled by a gluttonous boor such as yourself, she declared, causing her sisters and Nyan to pale extremely while getting cheers from all the Kuja while yelling at the emperor to leave the island before the Snake Princess killed her. That came to an immediate end when a gargantuan amount of conquerors' haki flooded the island and the surrounding miles, sending hundreds of Amazons into unconsciousness while blasting the Snake sisters and Nyan back into the far side of Hancock's chambers. I see, Big Mom stated slowly, though it was clear she was pissed. And here I thought I'd be nice and come hard to offer you all a deal in your time of need, considering how your ties with the government have been cut. Big Mom told the Empress, whose eyes widened as she got before narrowing dangerously. And just how do you know that? Hancock hissed at the invader, who merely chuckled ominously. Mama, curious are you? Why don't you join me and find out? Big Mom told the Snake Princess, who snarled as she rushed towards the Emperor while ignoring the cries to stop. Not willing to talk, then I'll make you, Hancock screamed as he hockeyed up her leg to kick the older woman, only for Big Mom to causally grab her by the extended leg. Oh well, the hard way it is then, she commented as she raised several feet into the air before turning and throwing Hancock clear across the island and into the jaws of one of the stone snakes carved into the mountains. The Kuja took this as their signal to attack, as acting as one, all the Kuja young and old let loose hundreds of arrows, all embedded with haki, all laughed towards the Emperor with the hopes of downing her. Unfortunately, Big Mom just floated there, grinning in amusement, as most of the arrows missed her while those that did bounced off her harmlessly. Cute, but unfortunately I don't have time to play with all of you today, so. She stopped mid-sentence as she snapped her fingers and 3 portals opened up around the city. The Kuja watched, mouths agape and eyes wide with horror, as hundreds of monsters ranging from minotaurs, cyclops ogres to Scythian dracani, griffins and manticore, all fully armored and ready to tear the Kuja apart. Big Mom, seeing this, grinned cruelly. Now then, let's try this again, she said, getting the Kuja to look at her. Submit to me or die, she said, raising in hand as a fireball appeared in her palm as she looked down on the island, knowing that as long as she kept the cooks alive she would get what she wanted. Before she could get a proper answer, however, Sonia and Mari both emerged from the chambers and jumped towards Linlin, with Mari swinging down her massive pole arm while Sonia went for a kick. Don't be so arrogant and think you can come here, hurt our sister, and demand we bow to you, Mari shouted as she and Sonia tried to strike the Total Land Queen, only for Big Mom to block it simply by raising her arm. Mama, well, in that case, she said before breaking the struggle and pointing her palm at the 2 snake sisters before launching a fireball at the 2 younger sisters, who were blasted back into one of the buildings, causing it to collapse in a pile of burning scraps. Turning to her summons, she called out to them. Well, you heard the brats, looks like we'll have to take them by force, she ordered, getting roars from the monsters who began to attack Kuja, who either fought back the best they could or defended the children while tried to escape towards the ship. Big Mom watched the scenes play out from above, laughing as her monsters caused massive destruction. Whether that be killing, destroying homes, to stealing anything that looked valuable. If nothing was done, Amazon Lily would be done for, regardless if they joined Total Land or not. Although, it may not be as easy as I first thought, Big Mom muttered as she watched something blur through town almost faster than the eye could see and through the fighting, as every monster that got close to it was turned to stone. Well, the government didn't make her a warlord for nothing, Big Mom said to herself as she watched Hancock tear through any monster that got in her way, a look of pure fury in her eyes. Once the warlord got close enough to see the yonko again, her rage seemed to grow leaps and bounds. You come here unannounced, practically force us into servitude, and are now trying to kill enough of us until we submit? Unforgivable, she roared before jumping high into the air, hockey flowing off her leg. Perfume femur magma, she roared, slamming her leg, nailing Big Mom right in the stomach as Hancock looked at Big Mom, wanting to see the twisted agony that was about to appear on the yonko's face. Big Mom didn't even blink. Big Mom grinned maliciously down at the stunned warlord as she reached behind her and drew her sword. Is that really the best you can do? How disappointing. Big Mom mocked before swinging her sword down and straight across Hancock's torso, causing the Snake Princess to cry out in pain before getting punched down into the same burning wreckage her sisters had been slammed into. As she landed, Big Mom casually strolled over to the wreckage, clearly feeling their live signatures thanks to her hockey. Well, are you just going to lie there, or are you going to actually get up and live up to your reputation? She taunted as the wreckage shifted and moved until the three sisters emerged. However, Boa Hancock was shaking, and her sisters could clearly see why, as during the last exchange between the two, Hancock had lost the top of the dress she was wearing and was now exposed for the world to see. Sister, you're back, the younger Snake sisters cried out before desperately looking around for something to cover her with, while Hancock sat there shaking, her anger having been replaced by fear and panic as she tried to stay out of sight from anyone who might see her slave mark. This just caught Big Mom's interest as raised an eyebrow. Oh, what's this? Does the Snake Princess have a dirty little secret? She asked, walking deliberately slow to raise Hancock's panic, even as the Snake sisters activated their devil fruits, with Sonia's being the snake fruit model, Anaconda and Mari being the snake fruit model, King Cobra. Mari instantly lit herself on fire to activate her Medusa hair salamander, while Sonia shifted her hair to activate Medusa hair, 8-headed serpent. Instantly, Mari shot forward, trying to use her bulk and fire to damage the older woman, while Sonia staying back ready to attack at a distance while also help guard Hancock. Before Mari could slam into her target, however, Big Mom grabbed her and lifted her into the air like she weighed nothing. The flames not bothering her in the least as she flung the youngest of the three towards Sonia, who couldn't react in time, resulting in not only Sonia getting burned by her sister's attack but also the two getting tangled up, forcing them out of their devil fruit abilities. By that point, Big Mom had reached Hancock and without a care snatched her up by the hair and lifted her into the air, exposing her to the world. Now then, let's see what you're hiding, Big Mom said before turning her around. Upon seeing the mark on Hancock's back, Big Mom's eyes widened before they filled with malice and amusement. Mama, well, isn't this a surprise? The untouchable Snake Princess turns it to be nothing more than the runaway plaything of the celestial dragons. Lin laughed as tears of fury and despair spilled down Boa's face at her darkest secret, being exposed only to freeze in absolute terror at what Big Mom said next. Wonder how much I could get if I sold back to them. For 10 agonizing seconds the whole world froze for the Snake Princess, as her mind flashed through every second of the 4-year hell she and her sisters went through, and the concept and possibility of going through it again nearly broke her. Thankfully, Big Mom laughed again. Mama, I'm only joking, she revealed before bringing the Snake Princess up to her face. I just wanted to see the look of despair on your face, and I gotta say it was even better than I had imagined. The Emperor cackled, and in an instant Boa's despair turned to fury. You wretched! Only for her to cut off as Big Mom slammed her into the ground before grinding her into the ground with her heel, grinning maliciously as she heard a loud snap and the former warlord screamed in pain. Slowly taking her foot off of the warlord, she looked around and saw that despite numerous of her monsters dead around her, the Amazons were faring much worse, with dozens of dead bodies around them, and even more severely injured. Looking down at the warlord, she said tiredly, Well, congratulations, I've changed my mind. The Charlotte matriarch began. I don't want you to join me anymore, Snake Princess, she said, and Boa Hancock looked up weakly, a small bit of hope in her otherwise defeated eyes. Really? Then does that mean you'll leave? She asked, and Big Mom nodded with a smile. Yes, I will, she said happily before it turned into one with malice. And I'll be taking your island with me, the Emperor revealed. But you said? The Empress stammered, with Big Mom continuing to cackle. I said I don't want you anymore, Snake Princess. I never said I wasn't taking your island. Big Mom mocked Hancock before delivering one last stomp to her head, knocking the former warlord out before doing the same to her sisters. Carelessly picking up the Snake sisters by the hair and dragging them to the harbor, watching with a grin as the Kuja lost more and more ground to the monsters, with the last of their will being shattered when they saw the broken forms of their leaders. Finally reaching the harbor, Big Mom casually jumped onto the ship right in front of the ladder that connects the ship to the island. Snake Princess. The Kuja screamed, terrified, with Gloriosa deathly pale at not only their current condition but at the fact that all three of their backs were exposed. Looking down and recognizing the elder from earlier, Big Mom addressed her. You, hag, how many are currently on this ship? The Emperor asked, with Gloriosa sweating answered slowly. About 30. Humming, Big Mom looked around at all those on the ship, recognizing most of them aren't even pirates, or the warriors. That sounds like enough, she muttered before turning back to the elder. If anyone else tries and board this ship, I'll kill them and their entire family, understand? Big Mom threatened suddenly, with the Kuja all going wide-eyed at that. But. One of the young Kuja on the ship stammered, with Big Mom unleashing a monstrous amount of Conqueror's haki. I said understand? Big Mom asked, her voice turning demonic as shadows seemed to cover her face as her eyes shined a bloody red. With tears in their eyes and true despair in their hearts, the Kuja could do nothing but nod as Big Mom smirked before barging into Hancock's quarters, where she proceeded to produce chains from a portal and string the three up until the sisters looked more like grotesque trophies. What a waste, Big Mom said with a shake of the head. If only you had agreed to join my family. With that she turned away and walked out, the Kuja all still frozen in place as seemed to stiffen up as she passed by them, getting another chuckle from the Emperor as she passed them and jumped of the rear of the ship, landing with a loud thud before she placed a hand on the ship and with a single push rocketed it into the air and out of sight, leaving it to crash down somewhere in the calm belt. Turning back to the remaining Kujas, she stared down at them in victory. Well then, ladies, shall we go? Miles away, the Kuja on the ship could only watch on in disbelief as the biggest portal yet appeared. From that portal a colossal hand, its size easily dwarfing Amazon lily, reached down and grabbed the island, disappearing from view before the hand slowly retracted back into the portal and leaving the remaining Kuja with nothing but despair and defeat. Flashback end. From there we did the best we could to survive. But with the Snake sisters chained up, and most of the Kuja injured, it was a struggle. Food ran out quickly and it only got worse when the two giant poisonous snakes that pulled the ship died. Eventually we were able to drift into the East Blue, which meant it was safe enough for Salome to go for help, and well, you know the rest. Gloriosa finished her tale and took note of 3 facts that all but Mihawk shared. Pale, shaking and sweating. Everyone of the Devil King with the exception of Mihawk were chalk white, while sweating and shaking violently, while Mihawk and Gloriosa watched as the full weight of what the crew was getting into finally and fully dawned on them. Some like Basil and Killer looked to be handling it well, with their skin only paling slightly, but Hawkins' hands were shaking violently, making it nearly impossible for him to shuffle his cards, while Killer looked around frantically as if he was expecting an attack from out of nowhere. The girls had huddled together, as if trying to take solace and comfort in each other's arms, with Nami being the most affected, shaking violently as Monet and Bonnie tried to calm her down despite their own shock, while Amma and Sue watched on helplessly, not having any idea of how to help their creator. Law and Kid meanwhile were glaring at nothing in particular and grinding their teeth as they clenched their hands together, both knowing that while they were strong they still need to train in order to surpass the powers of the world, such as the Yonko or world government. This, however, was an eye-opener to show just how small in the scale of things they truly were. That unless something was done they had no chance to accomplish their goals. Suddenly Izuku stood up, snapping everyone out of their stupor as he silently walked over to the side of the ship, 1,000-mile stare in his eyes as he looked at seemingly nothing before his shoulders slumped down with a sigh. The rest of the crew watched on concern, not used to seeing their captain like this, but before anyone could speak up Izuku beat them to it. You're all curious about how I use multiple devil fruits, right? Izuku asked, suddenly causing them to remain silent as Izuku sighed and turned around. You all have questions, and I think it's time you got your answers, Izuku offered. Izuku, you don't have to. Nami began, only for Izuku to shake his head. No, Nami, I do have to. This whole thing is turning out much more complicated than I first thought, and I'm not going to lead everyone in blind if I can help it. Izuku told the navigator before facing the others. Well, are you interested? The others looked at each other, not sure what to do, especially Gloriosa, who felt like an outsider, the events and story having shaken everyone. But after looking at each other, a silent conversation going on between them all before their eyes seemed to harden, and as one they nodded. Izuku, seeing this, nodded. Well, it all started when I was around 4 years old. And with that, Izuku told them everything, having awakened his quirk to growing up fighting in the battle tower before meeting Almight, and everything leading up to the USJ before explaining how he landed here. Of course, this was met with shock and denial, but the denial soon faded when Izuku then gave them trivial information about each of their past, leaving them disturbed that their captain seemed to know everything that had and will happen to them. However, that didn't last long either, as Izuku explained this world was different from the one he had memories. He gave examples such as Monet and her sister never being separated, Kid's crew never being killed by El Dorado, Bonnie never looking for anything called God, or that there was anything like that in the other world to begin with. He also went on to explain that the Yonko, or at least Big Mom, was nowhere near as strong as she was here, nor did ever attack the timeline. He also went on to explain how the timeline seems to be mixed up, with some people stronger and older than they should be, and others are the same, with everyone on board the ship being older than they should be. As the explanation ended, the crew was silent, trying to digest what was explained. Each of them had their own theory over their captain's power, but they never expected it to be something like this. None knew what to say, and who could blame them after hearing all that? Ultimately, it was Mihawk who broke the silence. So what exactly was your plan? Surely you had one when you set sail. Mihawk questioned, with Izuku sighing before looking at Nami, having explained that she already knew in brief circumstances of how they meet. The navigator looked back and nodded towards her captain, who looked back at his crew. My plan was exactly what I told you before. Get to the One Piece and take down everyone in our way. The warlords, Yonko, and world government were all on that list. I figured if there's anything that could get me home, it would be with the One Piece, and by the time we got to it, the crew would be strong enough to survive without me. Izuku explained before taking a deep breath. Believe me, I had every intention to tell you. I was just waiting for the right time. I should have told you all from the beginning when all these chances started, but since they were handled so easily, I didn't feel the need to, Izuku said before shaking his head. But this showed me that was a mistake, and I should have been honest for the beginning, Izuku said before bowing and apologizes. That said, I can't apologize for deceiving you, and if anyone wishes to leave, I'll complete understand. Izuku apologized, waiting for the crew to say they were going to quit. What he didn't expect was to get bonked on the head. You idiot! He heard Kid mutter as he looked up and saw Bonnie and Kid look at him annoyed, while Law, Hawkins, Monet, Hawkeye, and Killer, despite having his helmet on, looked at him in slight amusement. Don't go thinking so lowly of us that we would leave for something like this. Besides, I didn't exactly join you on my free will, or did you forget our little fight? Kid asked, with Bonnie nodding her head in agreement. Yeah, it's not like you tricked any of us to join. We all willing came along. Our goals matched up, so it only makes sense we work together, Law said, sounding and looking completely relaxed, though Izuku recognized the look and in his eyes and knew immediately the Dark Doctor was already planning. Indeed, fate has decreed I followed you, so I will, it doesn't matter why. Hawkins threw in his 2 cents. Right, you simply saw opportunities and took them, like any pirate would, Kid added. Myself and Monet both asked to join this crew, a decision I stand by, Hawkeye reminded him, with Monet nodding in agreement. It seems to me that you might have underestimated your crew a bit, wouldn't you say? Gloriosa spoke up, having watched the scene with a small smile, with Izuku nodding before turning and raised an eyebrow. Hey Hawkeye, I just thought of something. You said that you had no idea why the snake would be kicked out of the warlords, but you must have also have taken part in the battle against that giant pirate fleet. How'd you never put 2 and 2 together? Izuku asked, causing everyone to turn to the swordsman, curious about that themselves. All the man did was shrug. I had my suspicions, but considering everything that the Snake Princess was allowed to get away with, it wouldn't have surprised me if they had come up with an excuse for her. Because they found her beautiful. Hawkeye answered with Gloriosa looking comically depressed, as that was the only reason Hancock had been able to keep her title as warlord for so long. Well, moving on then. Kid started, not interested in going any deeper into that conversation, as he turned to Izuku. What's the plan now, boss? From what little you've told us, the Yonko that other world have nothing on the ones here. Kid asked, wondering if Izuku had any plan to fight against them, a thought that was shared the rest of the crew. Izuku, for his part, remained silent for a few moments before slowly nodding. Yeah, or at least the beginnings of one, he admitted as he slowly walked over to the side of the ship as the crew watched him intently. When I first got here, I decided it was best to have a small crew of experts rather than a giant crew of average pirates, less to worry about and less to keep track of. Izuku started as he watched the sea before looking down. But now I don't think that's going to work. We could have some of the strongest pirates alive, and we will still be overrun from sheer numbers alone. Never mind crew like the Yonko who have both numbers and powerful members. Izuku said, cementing the truth as the crew nodded, some stoically, others with looks of fear or anger. That is until Izuku's next statement. So why don't we do the same? Izuku said, causing everyone to raise their eyebrows. There are plenty of strong crews out there and unbelievably powerful people out there. So why don't we start expanding our crew and start recruiting entire crews instead of a few people at a time? Izuku proposed, with the crew members thinking it over. It could work, if we could convince them to join, that is. Killer said, scraping his chin in thought. I don't believe that conniving them to join will be difficult, Hawkins said. Our captain has gained an incredible price on his head without even leaving the East Blue. It will also soon become known that a former warlord, the greatest swordsman in the world no less, has joined with us as well. On top of that, the Grenadine will soon give the rest of us a chance to prove and make names for ourselves. Once that happens, I find it hard to believe we won't be able to convince crews that we come across to join us, be it out of respect or fear. The magician explained. I gotcha, Hawkeye. Law smirked as he rested his sword against his arm. And even if we can't recruit soul crews, there's bound to be 1 or 2 members willing to come over to our side. The Dark Doctor smirked along with Kid as the two thought of destroying crews and taking some of their best members. They couldn't wait. Now hold on a minute. Nami entered the conversation, bringing up her hands as if trying to stop their train of thoughts. There's a lot of points you're all overlooking, she said before tossing a single finger. The first is space and resources. Even if we somehow manage to convince others to join us, we won't have the space to put everyone. Even when the Kuja leave, we'll only have so much room, as well as food and medical supplies, Nami said as she held up a second finger. Second is management. If we recruit too many people, it will be an unorganized mess with people constantly barking orders at each other. It would be instantly. She yelled as she held up a third finger. Third, and most importantly, if we recruit people the way you're talking about, what's to stop them from stabbing us in the back when someone stronger comes around? The navigator demanded, her hands being thrown in the air to showcase her unease and distress as she breathed in and out deeply. Monet, seeing her friend's concern, walked over and gently wrapped her into a hug, which Nami leaned into. It's okay, Nami, we'll figure something out. She spoke soothingly as Bonnie joined in. The Snow Angel's right. Our crew is filled with monsters, psychos, and everything in between. I'm sure we can figure something out, Bonnie said as the rest of the crew looked at each other with raised eyebrows at the insult before shrugging it off, each one having been called far worse in the past. That aside, Izuku re-entered the conversation. Your concerns, Nami, while true, are easily to fix, he said as he raised a finger. The first was about space and resources. Well, that's a simple fix. We just have to start talking the boats of those we beat, be it Marines or pirate. Yeah, it's harsh, but that's the world we live in. Here he raised a second finger. The second is management, about us getting too big. Well, then we simply divide it into divisions and fleets like the Yonko do. That way we can enlist commanders and officers to give out orders, he explained before sighing and lowering his hand. As for the third option, well, there's nothing we can really do about that. There will always be people like, not much we can do there. Izuku finished with a sigh, getting nods from the more experienced members of the crew who have run into such people. After hearing her captain's explanation, most of Nami's concerns were gone. Though she was still uncertain about this plan of action, she had to admit it was their best shot right now. Alright then, where should we start recruiting? Should we wait a bit and gather some forces from the East Blue, or just wait till we get to the Grand Line? Nami asked, seeing the merits of both only, but before anyone could suggest one thing or another, a chuckle was heard as everyone turned to Gloriosa, who had a smirk on her face and had been silently observing for a while now. You ask where you should start recruiting, and yet you already have. She spoke lowly and slowly, deliberately. For you see. She spoke a little louder and faster. The Kuja will join your cause. She finished with a shout as she posed as if she made a great announcement. Only to balk as the Devil Kings looked at her with suspicion and deadpans. Right. And we should believe you, why? Kid asked, his face a deadpan. A tick mark formed on the elder woman's face as she glared at the redhead. Because our goals match up. You want to defeat the Yonko, and we want to get our home and people back, so it makes sense to team up. Besides, you saved us, so that means you have to take responsibility. She finished with a cry. Yeah, well, it's not really up to you to de-ice things like that, is it? Law said, rolling his eyes. That would be your empress, and she's a known man-hater. So I don't think she'd be eager to become the subordinate of one as well as a crewmate to others. He countered before looking at her with a raised eyebrow. And judging by your story, you really aren't the best person to try and convince her. He fish-toned, borderline mocking, causing the old woman not gnash her teeth together. She isn't, but I might be able to. All conversation stopped as everyone's head turned to the source of the new voice, and standing there was Boa Sandersonia, smiling shyly like the young child she currently was. Hi. Line break. This is it, people. Reverse Mountain is right in front of us. Is everyone ready? Izuku shouted over the storm, getting cheers from the crew, including Gloriosa and Sonia. It had been 3 days since the Sandersonia had woken up and agreed to join the crew. Gloriosa was naturally shocked when the green-haired young girl was so eager to join. Turns out she had been awake when the Devil Kings showed up, so she knew what the crew had done for them. Most importantly, she knew what Izuku did her and her sisters. Luckily, she had been eavesdropping on them and heard Izuku's story, so he didn't have to explain himself or sum up with a lie that would explain why he wasn't shocked to see her mark, and later he took her aside and told her they'd come up with a different story later for both the crew and the Kuja that would explain everything without revealing her true past. So now they stood on the deck of the Sharon, both new members of the crew, though Sonia did have to stay a young child for the time being, as they didn't have any other clothes that would fit her otherwise. The two were also the only Kuja awake, the rest needing more time to recover, with Law deciding the best way to do that is in their sleep. Nami, how's our position? The captain asked as the other men did their best to keep the ship straight, while Izuku stood at them helm ready to steer. We're good, Izuku. If we can maintain this, we should get in no problems. She shouted, looked through the spyglass to see if they were still on target. Nodding, Izuku turned to the rest of the guys. You heard her, just a few more minutes, guys. He shouted, getting AYYS from the men as he turned his attention to the sky, where Bonnie was in the crow's nest and Monet flying through the air, the wind of the storm doing nothing to embed her. Only enemy sights, girls? He asked, only to get negatives from both of them as both descended to the deck below. Alright, looks like we're as ready as we're ever going to be, Izuku muttered as the gates were getting closer and closer. Will people, any final words before entering the Grenadine? He asked, getting headshakes from the crew. There was nothing more that needed to be said. They had their goals and knew what they had to do. Talking right now was meaningless. Chuckling, Izuku turned his attention back to the front just as the currents from Reverse Mountain. Well then, he said as they entered the gates. Let's go, he shouted as the ship shot forward and up the mountain and into the clouds, knocking away any debris that could get in their way. The crew rode in sync as they entered the clouds, each thinking about their past and recent memories, their goals and dreams, and the crew they had somehow found themselves a part of, and the one that would share the adventures that were sure to come. Almost there, just a little more. Izuku thought, having known this sight so many times thanks to all the memories of Devil Fruit user that came before, but to see it himself was something else. Just got to take care of one little thing first, he thought, crouching down before shutting forward to the top, ignoring the shouts from crew as he waiting for the ship to come, delivering a strong hit to the side with enough force to turn it just enough to turn it down the other side and straight down the rapids into the Grand Line. "This is it, people. The second we reach the bottom, we'll have reached the Grand Line," he shouted, getting cheers and laughter from the others. "So what do you plan to do about the whale?" Everyone stopped as they looked towards Hawkeye, who raised an eyebrow as everyone looked at him in confusion as Izuku just smirked. "Know about that, huh? Not surprised, really." Izuku chuckled. "I'm sorry, what whale?" Nami asked with a nervous laugh. "So you have a plan to deal with it?" "Seriously, what whale?" Law asked, starting to grow impatient about something that must be important if Hawkeye brought it up. "Well, not so much as deal with as just avoiding it." "Would you just answer out questions?" "What bucking whale?" Kid snapped, not like being kept in the dark about something. Only for him and the rest of the crew to cover their ears as massive bone-rattling roar suddenly rang out as they both entered the clouds, blocking the source at first only for it to slowly come into view until finally they were below the clouds and could get a good look at the source. "Oh!" Kid managed to squeak out as the Devil Kings stared at the sheer size of the behemoth in front of them. "That whale." Grand Line greetings. As the ship got closer and closer to colliding with the whale, some of the crew started to grow just a tad bit nervous. "Well, boss, feel free to save us at any time," Kid muttered, trying to hide the small bit of panic in his voice as a bead of sweat ran down his face, while Law had his hand extended with a troubled look on his face, ready to use a room at any time. Izuku, for his part, simply jerked his fingers up, and within seconds the ship was flying through the air and safely above the whale. The majority of the crew collectively breathed a sigh of relief as they slumped down before looking towards Hawkeye, Hawkins, and Monet, who were the only ones not fazed by the danger. Seeing this, Monet covered her face as it took on an amused expression. "My, it seems like some of us forgot our captain could do this," she lightly teased, getting embarrassed looks from Killer, Law, Sonia, and Gloriosa, and burning blushes from Nami, Kid, and Bonnie. "Shut up," the latter three yelled, trying to hide it as Izuku lowered the ship back into the sea and looked around. "So this is it," he thought as he looked around and saw the seemingly calm sea stretch far over the horizon. "The Grand Line, the place that will hold the key to me getting home," Izuku thought, taking it all in. "That's if you want to go home by that point." A traitorous thought spoke up, causing Izuku to scowl and quickly rid himself of it. As their captain was doing this, those in the crew that have never been to the Grand Line looked around in wonder, ready to take on the sea that had been dubbed the Pirates' Graveyard. Kid, however, were disappointed as to how calm things were. "And I thought the Grand Line would be a little more exciting." The redhead huffed as he crossed his arms, while Law simply rolled his eyes. "We just narrowly avoided getting hit by a whale, Eustace. I would think that would be enough." The Dark Doctor rolled his eyes while Eustace growled at him. "Speaking of the whale, where did it go?" Nami asked, glancing around nervously as she searched for the beast that almost ended their journey, only to find nothing, and was about to sigh in relief when she didn't see it, only to scream as the entire area started to shake with a large banging noise started. "H, what's going on?" Nami screamed, clutching onto the mast as Gloria and Sonia went to make sure the Kuja were fine, as the rest of the crew remained vigilant, ready for a fight, only for their attention to be taken by two figures appearing on the shore. "Ah, that damn beast is at it again, Ms. Wednesday," a male voice screamed over the noise as a female voice replied. "I'm aware of that, Mr. 9. This monster just lives to make our lives difficult, doesn't it?" she replied as the two came into view. Nefertari Vivi. Izuku thought, having to hide his smile as he looked at one of the most peaceful but determined young women in the world. Though right now she's technically an enemy, he thought with a small sweet drop before smirking. "Let's change that," he thought before disappearing suddenly to his crew's surprise before appearing right behind the two bickering pair, shocking them and giving them no time to react as slammed his foot into Mr. Nine's stomach, launching him onto the ship and into unconsciousness. "What the?" Vivi shouted, eyes full of disbelief and fear, as Izuku suddenly grabbed her by the back of her jacket and repapered on the deck of his ship. As Izuku was sitting the girl down, his crew approached, looking more than a little confused and irate. "Well, Captain, mind telling us what that was about?" Law asked, shouting to be heard over the ongoing banging, only for him and most of the others to lose their balance as the whales suddenly emerged from the sea again, launching their ship away from the shore. "1 second. Izuku promised before launching himself into the air before rocketing towards the whale before kicking him with such power it was forced back under the water. Sorry about that, Laboon, but it's for your own good. Izuku thought before his observation haki activated and Izuku crossed his arms and covered them in armament haki right before the whale emerged out of the water and slammed its tail into Izuku, sending him back hurtling into the red line and impacting with a mighty boom. Getting up and ignoring the cries he was hearing from his crew, he walked up to Whale, who was looking ready to strike again before Izuku held up his hand. That's enough, he claimed, adding a bit of Conquer's haki to his voice. Right now it's a tie, so we'll have to settle this one day, he informed that Whale. So listen, me and my friends plan to sail across the whole world, so that means we'll eventually be back here. If you can wait and not slam against the red line anymore, we can have our rematch then. He proposed going for the Luffy approach, and it seemed to work as Laboon looked at him with wide eyes as if remembering something before pulling back and letting out a cry of joy as if accepting the challenge, which brought a smile to Izuku's face. Only for his face to immediately become smoke as Nami, after reaching the shore again with the rest of the crew, tried to slam her fist into his face. Idiot, what the hell were you doing? She demanded, only for the answer to come from an unlikely source. Something I've been trying for the last 50 years. An old, gruff voice came from the lighthouse, followed by footsteps until finally the door opened and the man emerged. Crocus, Izuku thought with a grin as he watched the monster of a doctor approach him. Just like with Rayleigh, he's as strong as ever. He continued his thoughts. Just as he suspected, Crocus was just as powerful as we imagined him to be, time doing little to diminish his strength. The other haki-sensitive crew members seemed to realize this too, as Sonia and Gloriosa froze up at seeing him, while Hawkeye didn't show any reaction, though knowing him he probably already knew Crocus was here. Nami, not knowing exactly who she was addressing, raised an eyebrow. And just what is it that? She asked, with Crocus only gaining a frown. That's a long story, he replied as he walked past the crew with them looking at him in confusion and slight curiosity. Well, it's not like we have anywhere to go right now, Bonnie rebutted, growing more and more interested. Reaching his beach chair, he sat down with a sigh before looking over at them as if analyzing them before beckoning them over. All right, kids, you want to know what the hell was wrong with that whale, and why it nearly killed you when you barely entering the Grand Line? He questioned, with the group nodding. Well, it all started with another group of pirates named the Rumbar Pirates. And from there Crocus told them of the music-loving pirate crew from 50 years ago, how they had come from the West Blue with a baby Laboon following after them. He spoke of their sorrow at having to leave the whale behind, but absolute refusal to take their friend into danger before he was ready, and most importantly he spoke of their promise to travel around the world and meet them again, coming from the exact same way, and finally reunite with their friend again. But, Crocus said, a tired sigh on his lips, as you can guess, they failed to keep that promise. After a couple of years I had heard they all died. I even joined up with a pirate crew for a year a couple of decades back to search for any survivors, but could never find them. He spoke with a regretful shake of the head. When I returned and gave Laboon the news, he refused to believe me, and the next day he started bashing his head against the red line, convinced that if he could knock that hunk of rock down he could go and find his friends again. He's been at it ever since. Crocus finished his tale. The reaction from the crew was mixed. Kid, Hawkins and Killer were mostly unaffected by the tale, though Kid had to admit the whale had guts to keep at what was an impossible task for 20 years. Law was mostly in the same boat, but he did sympathize with Laboon somewhat, know all too well how it felt to be too weak to help those you care about when they needed it most. The girls felt awful for the poor whale, each having to either grow up without a family or losing their family in the process, while Gloriosa bowed her head in silent prayer for the lost pirates. Izuku knew the story by heart, knowing it by both sides of the story. Still, it hurt to hear, especially with the whale in question being just a few meters away. But that stunt you pulled, Kid, Crocus went on with a laugh as he shook his head. That kind of insanity is what I would expect from my old captain. The crazy bastard would always pull asinine stunts like that, and leaving me to patch him up afterwards. He remized as those like Kid, Nami and Bonnie were wondering just what the hell kind of pirate captain would act like that. Law, however, picked up on something else. Wait a minute, old man, he said, getting Crocus' attention. You said you had to patch up your old captain, so does that mean you were the doctor on your old ship? He asked, hoping to rack his brain a little if that is the case. The retired man just nodded with a grin. Yup, you heard right. I was responsible for keeping all those crazy bastards alive, he admitted before raising an eyebrow. Why, you the doctor of these little brats? Crocus asked, ignoring the glare he was getting from Gloriosa at being called a brat by someone who she was willing to bet was around her age if not younger. Yeah, I was hoping I could ask you some questions about what's to come, so I could be prepared, Law told him with a lazy tone, though his eyes had hardened, something Crocus noticed. Interesting, most rookies these would boast about how they would have gotten on fine on their own and reject anything help offered. Crocus commented, with Law offering a shrug in reply. Most rookies are idiots. This earned a bark of laughter from the lighthouse keeper. True enough, he laughed before turning around and walking towards the lighthouse. Wait here a moment, I'll be right back, Crocus told them as he headed inside, as the crew looked at Izuku, who only shrugged back confused, showing even he didn't know what was going on. The only one who kept his eyes on the lighthouse was Law, whose eyes were filled with a greed-filled excitement, hoping the old man was doing what Law thought he was doing. The answer came seconds later as Crocus came out carrying 3 books under his arm. Here, brat. He spoke to Law, holding the books out to the younger doctor. In these are all the notes I took over my years at sea. They contain everything I learned from different disease to medical recipes and everything in between. I even made notes on several of the islands we visited and what to watch out for. Crocus reveled to the gaping crew and stunned Law, who slowly and shakily took the information goldmine before looking back at man with gratitude, something the crew hasn't seen from Law before, as he asked a simple question. Why? He asked, his voice still shaking slightly, wondering what the catch could be. All the old man did was snort. Don't look too deep into it, brat. I'm an old man who has nothing to do with his time. So a few years ago I started writing down notes and offering them to any doctor or crew that was willing to ask for them, he revealed, getting a nod from Law, who was regaining his normal composure. Anyway, welcome to the Grand Line. Should have said it earlier, but what can you do? The old man formally welcomed the Devil Kings as he once again turned around. Normally I'd let you dock here for food and booze, but considering what you did for Laboon, kid, I guess we could call it even, he said as he headed back inside his home. Just don't stay too long or I will charge you, he threatened. Thought it was obvious he didn't mean a word. Waving goodbye, he shut the door behind and turned on the light to his home before walking over and sitting at his table. Izuku Midoriya, huh? The old doctor thought as he started down at said Pirates Wanted poster before leaning back. Well, can't say I see you in him, Captain. Ray diffidently, but not you, he thought before looking out the window and saw the crew circled around, no doubt planning what to do next, before focusing on Izuku as he let a grin come to his face. But still, you pestered that kid, chasing him to the end of the world to get him into your crew, wouldn't you? He thought as he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep and memories of the past. Roger? Line break. Wait a minute, kid, you want Izuku to do what? Nami asked as she and the rest of the crew looked over to the magnetic power user in confusion, only getting a TSK from the redhead. I want him to raise the ship so we can see if there's any damage down to the bottom of the ship we need to repair. I know the captain can repair anything thanks to his powers, but still I want to take a look, Kid explained his odd request. Still seeing the looks of confusion, Killer decided to explain. When we were kids spent a lot of time building and learning how things go together. He was going to be the shipwright of our crew before we meet you guys, so you could say it's just old instinct surfacing, the masked man revealed, getting looks of understanding from the crew as Kid reddened in embarrassment. Keep stuff like that to yourself, Killer. These bastards don't need to know that. The redhead roared as the rest of the crew shot him looks of wearing amusement, from Law and Gloriosa snickering to Nami and Bonnie's full-blown laughter. Before Kid could snap at them, the area around them started to shake and the Sharon was raised as Laboon appeared underneath it, letting out another happy yelp, wanting to be helpful to his new friends. Ah, thanks, Laboon, but Izuku can take care of it. Nami cooed at the whale as she and Bonnie pet the whale affectionately as Izuku used the power of the float fruit to raise the ship up high as Laboon moved so he could see better. Well, Kid, what do you think? Izuku asked, not seeing anything wrong himself but wanted to get Kid's opinion on it. Kid's eyes scanned the ship carefully, going over everything carefully before letting out a sigh. Everything's fine, no need for anything to be fixed. Kid told the crew, who breathed out in relief as Izuku gently set the ship down gently in the water. That done, Izuku turned to Mihawk. Well, Hawkeye, are we ready to go, or is there anything we need? The captain of the crew asked his swordsman, who merely looked up and studied the position of the sun for a moment before giving his answer. There are 7 islands that we can get to from here thanks to the log pose. He started while indicating to said compass that was now on Navi's arm. And all 7 of them can be reached by nightfall if we leave now. He explained, getting excited looks from the crew before his gaze shifted to the cloud homie around Nami. And if what you told me about Sue is correct, we'll reach whichever one the log is pointing us towards even sooner than that. Mihawk spoke as the crew was quick to hurry to the ship. Wait, shouldn't we say goodbye to Crocus first? Nami asked as they hurried to the ship, only to be waved off by Kid. That wave he gave us over his shoulder seemed like a pretty good goodbye to me. He dismissed as they reached the Sharon and made it ready to sail as soon as possible. Izuku, who had flown over to the ship, was saying goodbye to Laboon in the meantime. I promise, Laboon, you will see us again, no matter what we have to do. Izuku promised, figuring that once he did find a way home, it wasn't something time-sensitive, and he could come say goodbye to the friendly whale before he felt. In fact, Izuku went on, leaning closer to the whale. I've got this good feeling in my gut that at least one of your old friends is alive, and if he is, I'll bring him back with me. Izuku promised. And that was the breaking point, as Laboon could no longer hold in his happiness, and let out a mighty cry of joy as tears began to fall. Izuku, he heard Nami call his name and turned to see his crew standing there with confident grins and smiles. Everything's ready, Captain, just give the command, Nami told him, causing a smirk to appear on the green-haired teen's face. Well then, everyone set sail, he ordered, getting a roar of "Aye" in return as the crew did as they were told, and the ship started to move. And as the Sharon moved ahead, Izuku and the rest of the crew caught sight of Crocus standing next to Laboon, who was giving his own goodbye while the old man simply raised his arm with a smirk. A bidding of farewell and good luck. A gesture the entire crew retuned until the two were out of sight. Well then, everyone. Izuku once again getting his own crew's attention. Let's get started. Line break. It's a well-known fact that outside the New World, that most dangerous part of the Grand Line based on the weather and sea alone was the section between Twin Cape and the first set of islands that follow it. This was due to the electromagnetic fields of the 7 islands right after Twin Cape that caused the weather to change at a moment's notice, making it exceptionally difficult for some and nearly impossible for others. However, should one have the proper tools, this leg of the journey could prove much easier than usual if used correctly. Luckily, the Devil Kings had 2 of these in the forms of Izuku and Sue. Sue, on Nami's command, flew and merged with clouds, letting the cloud homie control the weather and area. And while it couldn't move or disperse the storm, the homie was able to open up a hole in the storm, allowing sun to shine down on the ship, keeping it peaceful even as the storm raged unforgivingly around the ship. With the storm problem taken care of, all that was left the raging waves of the sea, which was taken care rather easily by Izuku, once again utilizing the power of the float fruit to soar above the waves below, leaving the only need is for Nami to keep her eyes on the log pose so they wouldn't be turned around in the air. There were 2 people on board the ship, however, who weren't happy with this, but seeing as those 2 were Mr. Nine and Mississippi Wednesday, who had been tied up before they set foot on Twin Cape, the crew were quick to ignore them and their constant complaining. Though they all did have a good laugh when they saw the shocked and terrified faces of their 2 faces when they saw exactly where they were. And seeing as they had a bit of a grace period before reaching the next island, Izuku, with the help of Mihawk, Sonia and Gloriosa, explained and started the crew's hockey training, which was really only giving in a bitter explanation of the 3 types than he had before the crew entered the Grand Line. Observation, a sixth sense in a way that let one detect living being around them, and if trained enough could get an idea of what an enemy would do next. Izuku also informed them that if trained enough, then one could see several seconds into the future. Something that got most of the crew very interested. Armament, the physical aspect that increases one's attack and defensive power, acting as a shield, armor and powerful weapon against devil fruit users with the use of hardening. The advanced techniques were even more interesting. Emission, which launches one's hockey in a small powerful burst, and emission, which is an attack from the inside, letting the user destroy the target from the inside out. Conquerors, the rarest type of haki born to only one in several million. It is the power to enforce one's will onto others and force those of weak wills into a state of submission, as if to say they were not worthy of the conqueror's attention, with another use being that if used with a sufficient amount of power one could damaging inanimate objects and structures within the user's vicinity. Going on to explain the black lightning that occurs when two conquerors truly clash. Finally, they went over the power of infusion, a rare skill even among the conquerors that allow them to infuse their body and weapons with their conquering spirit in a way similar to that of armament, immensely augmenting the power of their attack. After the explanation for each type, Izuku demonstrated how each works. Observation was simple enough, as he predicted what his crew would say several seconds before they did several times before putting one a blindfold and let Killer and Hawkins slash at him in vain as he dodged effortlessly. Armament was also easy to showcase, as he just hardened up different parts of his body, and showed how it worked as both offense and defense, as well as imbuing several weapons to show the difference in terms of strength. He also showed off emission and internal destruction, but it's easy to see that they weren't as honed as the other techniques, seeing as he didn't use them nearly as much as the more basic techniques. Izuku didn't dare use Conquerors here, knowing that when a flying ship in the middle of an artificial eye of the storm wasn't exactly the safest time to do so. But with the help of Kid and Law, who saw Izuku perform it against the Marines back in Loguetown. Finally done with his expiation, Izuku turned to his crew with a sigh. And that's the basics of it. We probably won't need haki much in the earlier parts FO the Grenadine, but learning it by the time we get to the new world is non-negotiable. Izuku told his crew as he took in the reactions of the non-haki users. Kid was actually salivating at the idea of mastering the powers of haki and annihilating anyone who got in his way. Even if I only master the basic forms of each, it along with the rest of my strength should let me get rid of anyone. He thought, a greedy smirk on his face as considered the possibilities. Law, Hawkins and Killer were also in the same mindset, already making plans on how to incorporate haki into their fighting styles. Nami, Bonnie and Monet, while less enthused than their shipmates, were quite excited at the prospect of learning haki, while also understanding the necessity of learning it before they got to the other half of the Grand Line. Seeing the state of the younglings, Gloriosa shook her head with a sigh, but a hum from her right caused her to turn and see Sonia deep in thought. "Is there something that matters, Sonia?" the older Kuja asked, with the middle snake sister thinking for a second before turning to the elder. "Elder Nyan, big sister, can you infuse her conqueror's haki to her physical strength, right?" At seeing the elder woman's nod, Sonia looked down towards her own hand as he covered it in hardening. "Out of the three of us, only big sister was born with all three types and was even able to push and master her conqueror's haki as far as possible, and even then she was thrown around like a rag doll," Sonia said, recalling the horrible day their island was taken as her hardening started to fade a bit. "I can easily say my specialty is observation, while Mari's is hardening, and even then we've really only taken them as far as mastering the basics," Sonia said, speaking quietly more to herself than the elder next to her, looking every bit like the small child Sonia currently was. "It worked fine for years since we never went into the new world. But now..." Here she trailed off, not as she shook her head as she tried to gain the nerve to finish her thought, with Gloriosa putting a hand of comfort on the green-haired girl's back and smiled encouragingly. "I know, and you're absolutely right, Sonia," the elder agreed, knowing what the girl was going to say, causing the snake girl to smile as before the two turned back and watched as Izuku and Hawkeye snapped the crew out of their thoughts. "Luckily it seems you'll have plenty of help in the future," she guessed, getting a nod of agreement before going to check on the other Kuja. Back with the rest of the crew, Izuku clapped his hands together to regain the others' attention. "That's enough daydreaming, people, focus up," he called out as the others snapped out of their own thoughts and turning their attention back to the captain. "Well, know that you know what haki is. You need to decide how far you want to try and go with it. Like I said, mastering the basics are going to be a requirement if you want to survive in the new world, but if you want to learn the advanced techniques, I'll help you in any way I can," Izuku told them. "Are you out of your mind, Captain? Of course we're going to master that advanced forms," Kid declared, a clenched fist in front of him, his powers activating unconsciously, causing the metal in the area to rise into the air, forcing all the weapon users to hold onto their weapons as they glared at Kid in annoyance. "Knock it off, you idiot! Nami shouted at him, smacking on the head with her jit with the sea stone tip, cancelling out his devil fruit, causing him to glare at the navigator while nursing the new injury on his head. The idol's enthusiasm aside, Law muttered with a roll of his eyes while ignoring the glare now pointed at him from the redhead. He was correct in saying that we'll take it as far as we can to increase our strength, the doctor announced, getting a nods from Hawkins, Killer, Bonnie, and Monet. Monet, you two actually agree with that? Nami asked, confused as to why they wanted to go that far. Of course, she was going to do as Izuku said and learn what she could about hockey and hopefully master the basics. But considering as she was a thief and not a fighter, and that her devil fruit was literally made others to fight for her, she considered the basics more than enough for her to survive. Bonnie, hearing Nami's question, rolled her eyes while Monet let out a giggle. Why so surprised, Nami? We're a tiny crew right now planning on taking on millions, whether it be the Yonko or the world government. We're going to need all the power we can get. And if we amass a truly gigantic crew, we're going to be the ones who will lead them as commanders, so we will need to be strong for hundreds if not thousands to put their trust into us and lead them into battle. Bonnie explained her reasoning with Monet nodding in agreement. Not to mention how it will optionally help our devil fruits, Nami. I mean, image me adding armament hockey to a blizzard created by my snow fruit or Ama, and Sue getting buffed by you challenging armament through them. Not to mention if you get the observation hockey's future vision, it could help if we're ever caught in an ambush for the like. The Snow Woman threw in her 2 cents. Nami meanwhile frowned but remained silent, but had to admit the two both made good points. If they remained small, then when the time came to fight massive amount of enemies at a time, then she is going to be expected to take care of her own share of them as to not burden her friends during those critical times. On the other hand, if they did gather a massive amount of numbers, it will be expected for her to be put into a leadership position and will need the boost hockey could provide. And Monet was right as well. If she could learn to transfer hockey over to her homies, then they could become much stronger, and thus she becomes much stronger. As Nami was going over all these thoughts in her head, Law started looking over the books Crocus gave him in earnest, and the more he read the more impressed he became. Hey Captain, he called, getting Izuku's attention. Do you know what crew Crocus was a part of? He asked, wondering if the crew the old lighthouse keeper was a part of had any devil fruit user that his captain could use to discover what the crew was. To his surprise, however, Izuku simply chuckled with nod. The Roger Pirates. It was as if the whole world grew silent as the crew had to take a second to process exactly what they just heard. Hey now. Kid stammered slightly, not even noticing his stutter, his eyes locked firmly on his captain. Are you telling us that the crusty old man who spent close to 5 decades with a whale and only left to find said mammal's friends was the doctor on the king of the pirates' crew? The magnet power user demanded, as all but Hawkeye looked on in shock at what Izuku just said. Yeah, that's right, Crocus was a part of his crew on their very last voyage, Izuku told the metal-armed man. So does that mean that he knows about the One Piece? Killer asked, turning his head to the other direction as if trying to catch one last glance at the man, even though they had departed hours ago. Yeah, he does, Izuku admitted as a silence fell into the crew before a thought struck Kid that caused him to go stiff. Hold on, wait a minute, he whispered as he broke out into a cold sweat, startling the rest of the crew slightly, having never seen him like this. Izuku, do you know about the One Piece, as in where it is and what it is? He asked, causing everyone to snap their heads over to Izuku, awaiting his answer, with the captain only letting out a sigh. I do, he admitted before adding on. At least I do about the other world. A lot of things are already different, and I have no idea if the circumstances regarding how to find One Piece or where it is are the same as they were in the other world. Though regarding what it actually is, can't say I want it to be the same, considering it's the only thing I can think of that can get me home. This gave the crew pause as they considered what Izuku just said. Looking at it from that angle, it made sense why Izuku would not tell them about that. Misinformation was worse than no information, and it was, the captain said. There was no guarantee that what the One Piece was, where it was, or how to get to it was anything close to how it was in this world. If they simply rely on just the memories Izuku has, some of which have already proven unreliable, then the only thing they'll end up reaching is disaster. An awkward and uncomfortable silence filled the air as no one knew exactly how to break before finally Bonnie let out a tired sigh and looked up through the hole Sue created and glanced at the small bit of parted sky they were traveling under. "Well, looks it's a little early for dinner," she commented, causing everyone to look at her with raised eyebrows as she headed towards the kitchen. "So why don't I prepare us a light sack? I mean, we need to celebrate entering the Grand Line, don't we?" she asked, and like that the awkwardness as one by one the crew adopted smiles as they voiced their agreement, and headed for the ship's dining room until it was only Izuku and Hawkeye. The two simply watched as the storm and waves raged around them just out of reach from their ship, both seemingly happy for the silence. Until it was Hawkeye to break it. "You know, I still find it hard to believe you've been able to gather the crew members that you have," Mihawk told his captain, who let out a small snort of agreement. "You have no idea. Bonnie, Kid, Law, and Hawkins," Izuku listed. "They're all captains in the other world and would never have even considered joining another's crew." Izuku told the swordsman, who nodded, recognizing that each had the potential to be a captain in their own right. "That only validates my point, at the absurdity of it," Mihawk continued before he narrowed his eyes with a serious frown coming to his face. "However, I would advise caution even with the crew we have gathered, Captain," Mihawk warned Izuku, who nodded seriously. "No shit, we have 30 Kuja, albeit inured and turned into kids in the medical bay, and I doubt they're going to be in the best of moods when they wake up, and after hearing what happened at Amazon Lily they'll probably be the least of our problems," Izuku predicted as scratched the side of his head before speaking again. "Believe Hawkeye, I know I've been lucky so far, and that if I do want to do what I've been saying, then everyone is going to have to fight and grow so they can be prepared for who will eventually be facing. Nor am I so deluded that I think we can get through everything that we're going to face without losing some people, especially if we start gathering people en masse," Izuku told Mihawk, whose full attention was now completely focused on Izuku with the same intensity that he showed when they first fought. "And what will you do when that time comes? When you do eventually lose your first comrade, how will you react? Will you rise to the occasion, or will you wilt and bulk like so many bright-eyed fools before you?" he questioned his captain, wanting to see how the young man would answer his challenge. Izuku himself actually did surprise Mihawk when all the younger man did was snort and wave his hand dismissively. "Do you really expect me to answer that without it sounding like some generic, childish bull crap?" he asked before turning back to staring out towards the horizon. "I'll fight like hell to prevent that day as long as I can, just like the rest of the crew comes," he said before going silent for a minute. "And when that day does come," he started again before clenching his fist, "then you'll have your answer," he said before shifting his eyes over to Hawkeye. "That good enough for you, Hawkeye?" he asked dryly. Hawkeye looked his captain in the eye for a moment before turning away with a smirk. "A satisfying answer I could ask for," he admitted before his smirk turned amused. "Though if you were hoping to avoid sounding like some generic story character, I hate to say, but you failed," he told his captain, who gained an embarrassed look on his face as he scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Great, instead of sounding like some generic optimistic naive fool, he sounded like a stone-faced, no-emotion edgelord sharp enough to steal. He didn't know which one was worst. "Hey Izuku, Hawkeye!" Nami's voice suddenly rang out from behind them, causing them to see her sticking her upper body out of the dining room. "You two better hurry in here before these idiots eat everything," she warned while ignoring the shouts now coming from the kitchen. Turning to his swordsman, he smirked. "Well, shall we?" he asked, getting a smirk from the man as the two headed inside. Line break. "Well, there it is, our first stop in the Grand Line," Nami said as they watched the island Izuku identified as Cactus Island. A few hours had passed since Izuku's and Mihawk's talk, and the ship was back in the water with the storm and monstrous waves dying down a little bit ago. The two whale hunters, Mr. Nine and Ms. Wednesday, jumped into the sea a couple of minutes ago, with the crew not batting an eye as they watched the two weirdos go. With them gone, Nami asked a couple of questions that Izuku couldn't answer when they had their guests on board. "So Izuku, how long will it be before the log post is set?" she asked, having been told by Hawkeye and Izuku how the log post works, and each island has a certain time frame before it sets, and can point to the next island. "Less than a day," Izuku answered, getting a nod from the navigator before moving on to her next question. "Okay, well, what kind of place is Cactus Island?" I mean, what kind of people live there? Nami asked, trying to get some information on the island. The answer came not from Izuku but Mihawk, and it did nothing to put Nami at ease. It's a town full of bounty hunters, who act as a town who welcomes pirates. They throw a feast and fill them with alcohol, and when the pirates all fall into a drunken slumber, slap them in chains and send them off to marines for the bounties. Mihawk explained, freaking Nami out and intriguing the others. Those bounty hunters are also members of Baroque Works, a criminal organization run by the warlord of the sea's crocodile, the so-called hero of Alabasta. Izuku added on casually, only working to freak out the already nervous navigator and exciting and intriguing the other members. So that's our first play in the Grand Line, taking down Crocodile? Law asked, a smirk on his face as leaned against the walls of the ship, while Kid was shaking in excitement as at the thought of fighting a warlord of the sea. Nami wasn't as intrigued. Do we really have to go to this island? Nami asked, a shakily hand in the air as she glanced around the rest of the crew, taking excitedly, though Bonnie was currently more interested in the so-called feast that would be supposedly waiting for them. The only one not looking excited was Hawkins, who was doing his usual fortune-telling. Something that she could never tell if it was a good thing or not. Chances of any misfortune befalling us 5%. Hawkins announced before doing another reading. Chances of benefits from the island 98%. Hawkins announced, only causing Nami to sigh in defeat. Between Izuku's knowledge and Hawkins' readings, there really was no reason not to go. Plus, Nami added, a greedy smile coming to her face. Who's to say that those benefits don't involve a ton of cash? She thought, while Amma and Sue were grinning at seeing their queen so happy. Well, looks like that's settled, Sonia muttered as she and Gloriosa exited the infirmary after checking on their fellow Kuja. You know, Sonia, we might be able to get you some new clothes from this place. I mean, there's bound to be some female bounty hunters there that we can steal you some clothes from, Monet told the snake girl before turning to Izuku. Right, Captain? She asked, getting a nod from the captain, causing Sonia's eyes to light up in excitement at the thought of getting clothes that can fit her older self. By this point they were nearing the island, and the hockey users could already pick up the life energies from the island. However, there was only thing that bothered Izuku. Captain? Mihawk spoke up, getting a nod from Izuku. I feel it too, Hawkeye. Izuku confirmed as he continued to focus on the island, where he was sensing 4 standout energies from the island. 3 were all reasonably stronger than the rest, but the last was so much stronger it could be considered monstrous. The rest of the crew had no time to even ask what they were referring to, as they had entered the channel that went through the island and entered a cave. This is it, people, get ready to party, Izuku warned as they exited the cave. Welcome, pirates. Hello. Congratulations on making it here. It was exactly like Izuku had told them, an entire town who seemed to love and welcome pirates to their town. Welcome, pirates, we of Ma Whiskey Peak welcome you. I am the mayor of this island, a man said as he made his way to front to greet the new arrivals. He a tall man with a small red nose and has blonde hair in a style that resembles a powdered wig, and dressed like a gentleman. Igaram, Izuku thought as he looked over the undercover Royal Guard captain. No surprise he's here. The captain thought before his eyes drifted over all the bounty hunters, trying to find the source of the stronger presences. Now let's see who you are. No way. Izuku denied. In his head he stared at 3 of the 4 people he felt earlier. Heat, Wire and Baby 5. What the hell are they doing here? Izuku thought to himself as he glanced back at Kid and Law, both of which he caught giving them a brief glance before turning away. What the hell is going on here? I thought Kid and Killer said their entire crew was killed, and Law's acting like he's never seen 5 before. Don't tell me it's another change. Izuku as Igaram continued his practice speech. Now I'm well aware of that. This certainly looks strange, but rest assured this town truly does love pirates and their lifestyles. Igaram continued with the lie, with the bounty hunters throwing in their own support. Now please, if you will follow me, we will hold a magnificent feast in celebration for your victory in making it here, he declared, with the Devil Kings looking towards their captain. Well, if they're going to go through all that trouble, we might as well enjoy ourselves, he decided, getting cheers from the crew as they docked and disembarked. However, before Izuku got off, his eyes glanced towards the infirmary, where Gloriosa and Sonia were also looking towards worryingly. Relax, you two, I've got this covered, he said as his right hand began to glow along with two glowing circles appearing on the deck of the ship. This is the power of the summon fruit, and through it one can summon a vast array of creatures. The bounty hunters and two conscious Kuja stared in shock and slight horror at what exactly came up. Izuku couldn't help but smirk at seeing their reactions. Death Knights do tend to have that effect on people, he told the two Kuja who slowly came out their hunk and headed towards the island. After all, judging by the terrified looks on the bounty hunters' faces, they're not going to be risking a fight with the two undead anytime soon. Content with the security he was leaving, he made his way over to Law and Kid, who had waited on the ship for him. Always got another trick up your sleeve, don't you, boss? Kid muttered with a smirk and shake of his head, while Law looked like he wanted nothing more than to dissect the two of them. Well, I gotta keep the enemies on their toes, he argued as they three made their way off the ship before Izuku's face adopted a serious expression, which his crewmates saw and did the same. So tell me something, did the two of you see anyone you recognized even a little? Izuku asked, getting negative reactions from the two. Not at all, Law asked before his eyes hardened and narrowed. Why should we? He asked, with Kid doing the same as the two figured out what their captain was trying to say. Those three, Izuku told them while discreetly pointing towards Baby 5, Heat, and Wire. Those three, huh? How do we know them? Kid asked, examining the three in question. The two men were part of your crew in the other world, Kid, he told the redhead, who after hearing that snapped his head over to the two and examined the two much more closely. And the woman is part of the bird's crew, he whispered to Law, who understood in an instant what he meant and gained a harsh glare of suspicion on his face as studied the woman. Calm down, you two, Izuku told his crew, and while Kid did as we was told, Law was still glaring at the woman, causing Izuku to sigh in annoyance before whispering to Law. Look, the other you meet her when the both of you were kids, and growing up she was never given an assignment this far away, so if she wasn't there before you were, chances are we can count on her not being affiliated with Doflamingo. Izuku tried to reason with the doctor, who only shifted his glare to Izuku. And if she is part of his crew? He asked with a dangerous tone, with Izuku not blinking as he stared Law in eyes. Then we'll make an example out of her. The answer brought the trio to a standstill just long enough to confuse the disguised bounty hunters before Law nodded, seemingly satisfied. Seeing his crew members, Izuku grinned as he continued to the town. All right, men, he said as they entered the building where the feast would be held. Let's party. Line break. And what a party it was. Music, dancing, eating, drinking, the feast had it all, proving that while it was just to get them to drop their guard and get them drunk, the bounty hunters had proven they knew how to throw a celebration. Bonnie, Kid, and Izuku all entered the eating contest, knocking out the other contest and 7 chefs, with Izuku barely pulling out a win thanks to the powers of the gum fruit and the munch fruit, though he did shudder in fear when Bonnie declared she would get her revenge in the future. The more reverse members of the crew, Law, Hawkins, Monet, Hawkeye, and Gloriosa, simply ate in peace while talking pleasantly with the islanders, with some of the more bloodthirsty members enjoying the slight nervousness some of the townspeople when they talked about previous fights not helping calming the terror they secretly felt when they first saw the world's greatest swordsman as part of the crew. Sonia left with a nun, which was really Ms. Monday, a tall, muscular woman with dark skin and pink hair in disguise, and came back a short time really with clothes big enough that allowed her to go back to her 16-year-old body, while also picking out some clothes for the other Kuja. Nami and Killer participated in the drinking contest, with Nami unsurprisingly winning it, and the cash prize that came along with it. While the party was going on, however, Izuku and his crew kept their eyes on Heat, Wire, and Baby 5, Izuku having told the rest of the crew who they were and their importance to Law and Kid. As the night went on, however, the bounty hunters were growing more and more nervous. The pirates were blazing through their food and alcohol, and even though if they managed to catch both Devil King and Hawkeye they would gain enough money, they would be set for life. Neither showed in signs until finally long into the night the Devil King pirates seemed to finally drift off to sleep. Finally, Igor muttered in relief as he checked on the pirates and saw all members played out in some fashion. When the princess told me about them, I was nervous about how a warlord and pirate worth 120 million were coming to the island, but it seems they're just as human as everyone else. The undercover royal guardsman, though, as he went to go meet up with the princess and co-workers. only to jump when a blood-curtailing roar of rage enveloped the island. The roar was primal, ancient, and it once again caused Igaram to be thankful that the source was unconscious and they had enough sea prism stone to keep them locked up. Still, the screaming needed to be stopped immediately, otherwise it could wake up the pirates, and then it would be a problem. Coming up to where the other agents were waiting, he immediately asked, "What the hell are you all doing standing around? Go sedate her again," he ordered, not wanting the other pirates to wake up and discover and try and free their prisoner because of some weird pirate honor. "We're all out, sir, Mr. 8. We used the rest of it the last time she woke up," Mr. 9 screamed in fear as he trembled in fear, and who could blame him? Luck had given them a pirate from the New World. And one from a Yonko's crew at that. They were out of their depths, and if she kept going like this she might actually manage to pull her chains free from the wall, and then they'd be screwed. "Damn it!" Igaram swore as sweat rolled down his face before turning to the strongest one there. Ms. Monday, go and try and gag that beast. The last thing we need is for her to wake up the other pirates," he ordered, with Ms. Monday nodding swiftly and was about to do as ordered, only to feel her blood freeze in the next second. "Oh, there's no need for concern," a voice said from atop the roof, with the 4 agents slowly turning their heads to see something that scared them even more than what they currently had tied up. The Devil Kings, all awake and looking ready to fight. The light of the moon shining down on them and also shadowing their eyes, leaving only Hawkeye's piercing glare and Izuku's 2 emerald eyes, glowing with power. But how?" Izuku saw Vivi stutter as she dropped to her knees, only getting a scoff from Nami. "Please, like any true pirate would fall for such a stupid act," she said, sounding like she was personally insulted they thought she was that stupid. This caused the 4 agents as well as the slowly gathering bounty hunters burn red with embarrassment. "But enough about us," Izuku continued with a grin that chilled the agents to the bone. "How about we talk about you and whoever you have in the chained up over there?" He pointed towards where the screaming was coming from, only increasing their fear even more, but it was what the young captain said next that sent them into a true panic. "Well, how about it?" Izuku said, his eyes glowing ever more sinister, which was soon joined by the rest of the crew. "Baroque works. Just getting started. Pure terror." That's what almost every member of Baroque Works felt as they stared up at the small group of mostly rookie pirates, which only grew worse when the 3 mercenaries and currently strongest of them all, Heat, Wire, and Baby 5, glared at them in suspicion. "So you're all with Baroque Works and not just some small bounty hunter organization?" Heat asked rhetorically while spitting out the last bit in disgust at the obvious lie. Well. Igaram jabbered while trying to think of something that can sway the 3, while also putting himself in front of the princess in case things turned violent. However, the foe agent wasn't able to give an excuse when Izuku answered for him. "That's right, they're known as the Millions, next to the bottom of the barrel in the organization next to the Billions. Honestly, it's a wonder that they haven't been taken out yet," Izuku told them before a thoughtful explanation came to his face. "Though it's probably due to you 4, is that right, Mr. 9, Mr. 8, Mississippi Monday and Mississippi Wednesday?" he asked, calling the 4 by their code names. The 4 named agents were now ghostly white with sweat falling rapidly. How could he possibly know so much? They saw that Hawkeye was there, but that doesn't explain it because as far as they knew, Hawkeye wasn't associated with their organization at all. "Well, as much as giving everyone here heart attacks is, I think it's time to get down to business," he said before turning to his crew. "Sonia and Gloria, go defend the ship. The rest of you deal with the agents down there, and I don't care how you do it. Just make sure you keep the blue-haired woman and the esteemed mayor in good shape. I want to talk with them about something," he ordered, getting nods from the crew while the 2 undercover agents went even paler at the fact they were singled out in particular. Izuku, ignoring this, turned to the 3 not associated Baroque Works. "Heat, Wire, 5, if you could all just stay out of the way, I'd appreciate it. There's something I need to talk with you about later," he said, getting raised eyebrows from the 2 men. Just how'd he know their names? As for 5, she couldn't care less. The moment she heard the words "I need" and "you," she was instantly turned to mush. Seeing this, Izuku nodded. "Now if you excuse me, I'm going to go meet the source of that screaming," he told his crew, and was about to head over there when he heard a great big shout of "No!" The crew, confused and blinking, glanced down to see the bounty hunters now all assembled, shaking worse than ever as they pointed their weapons at the group. We're not letting you let that monster out! A cowboy shouted in alarm with a nun nodding in agreement. The second she's free we're all dead! She screamed. Yeah, we'll fight you bare-handed if it comes to it! A third shouted as more and more chimed in their opinion, not seeing Izuku turn to Kid give him a small nod and get a maniacal grin in return before facing the bounty hunter once again. Okay, challenge accepted. Extending their hands, Izuku and Kid activated the magnet fruit, ripping the weapons out of the bounty hunter's hands much to their shock and horror, and formed them into balls which Izuku quickly touched and activated the float fruit, making them float well out of reach, with Kid taking enough to form a couple of golem arms. With that, Izuku disappeared with a shave, leaving his crew with the slowly inching away bounty hunters. Well, you heard him. Law smirked down at the terrified bounty hunters. Come on, Devil Kings, let's get to work! And with that, the pirates sprang into action. Kid and Law jumped straight into the thick of it, with Kid smashing and slashing his unlucky victims apart, while also blasting apart others with the assembled guns and cannons on his makeshift arms. Law meanwhile was making use of his swordsmanship, which proved far superior to those he was facing. Along with that, he also used his shambles technique to switch places with bounty hunters, making them take hits meant for him, while also putting Law in position to attack them from behind. Killer and Hawkins were making their own way through the bounty hunters, with Killer mauling his way through with his gauntlets, while Hawkins merely pierced his enemies with his blade while also taking hits so more bounty hunters would take the damage themselves, having their hair taken unknowingly by Hawkins during the party. Bonnie and Monet played clean up whatever was left, with Bonnie breaking bones with her fist, not bothering with her devil fruit, while Monet hit the remaining bounty with storms worth of ice and hail, burning them until they were suffocating under the frozen water. This included Mr. Nine, who was hit with a barrage of snow rabbits, riddling his body like gunshots until one found its way through his brain, killing him instantly. This terrified Ms. Monday at the death of her secret love and distracted her enough for Bonnie to land a well-placed kick to her spine, killing her instantly. Throughout this Nefertari, Vivi, princess of the Arabasta kingdoms, sat near catatonic at the carnage that surrounded her, the death of the two numbered agents that, despite being a part of the organization, she had befriended the two, seeing as they were just bounty hunters who joined up with Baroque works for some extra protection. Igaram was already in the motion of scooping the princess up in his arm and making a run for the boat they had and flee. The fact that the screaming of their prisoner stopped only made him go quicker. However, he only made it 3 steps when a small sun appeared in front of him. Stop at once! Amma ordered as it grew hotter and hotter and grew bigger and bigger, while Sue grew bigger as well as it soared into the air. Now, there's no need to rush, Nami told the man as she approached, careful to step around the large puddles of blood that were forming. I don't know why Izuku wanted to talk with you, but it probably means he does mean to hurt you yet, the navigator told the captain of the guard, which didn't ease his fears or worries at all. As a last resort, he threw a desperate glance towards Heat, Wire and Baby 5, silently begging them to help, but the men just seemed more focused on the pirates fighting, while Baby 5 was still lost in La La Land. Seeing no other choice, and with a heavy heart, Igaram was about to surrender and plead for the princess's life when a familiar voice to him at least made itself heard. Well, looks like someone here decided to have a party. The voice, undeniably male, commented with a female laugh accompanying it. Indeed, and a wild one at that, Mr. 5. The woman continued to laugh. Hope bloomed in the man's heart as he spun around rapidly. Mr. 5, Ms. Valentine, thank goodness you're here just in time, he shouted in relief as he, Nami, and the two homies watched the two figures approach. Oh? Mr. 5 asked with a raised eyebrow. And what are we just in time for? He asked the larger man. Why, to help us, of course. With you here, these pirates don't stand a chance, he shouted. Now please take care of these fools while I get Ms. Wednesday to safely, he requested, and was in the process of getting to his feet when a familiar clicking noise came from behind him. Slowly and carefully Igaram turned until he was staring down the barrel of Mr. 5's gun. For the second time that night, words failed the guard captain as his brain tried to comprehend what was happening. Mr. 5 saw this and snorted. Why so surprised? You know what happens to traitors of Burj works, Mr. 5 explained, getting a horrified look from the man. Then again, Mr. 5 continued with a smirk. Is it really treason when you were never loyal to begin with? Well, Mr. 8, or should I call you Igaram, captain of the Royal Guard? he asked, with Igaram now going into full-blown panic, especially when the man directed his attention towards the woman in his arms. Or maybe we should Princess Vivi herself, the high-ranking agent suggested while slowly moving towards the pair. Princess? No wonder Izuku wanted to talk to her, Nami thought while trying to learn as much as she could. Igaram, seeing the jig was up, glared. Alright, you caught us, so what are you going to do with us now? Take us to the boss so he could deal with us personally? Igaram asked, getting a snort from the man who merely waved his gun. Does this look like I'm taking you to the boss? Sorry, old man, but your little quest ends here and now, Mr. Five told them, and was seconds away from pulling the trigger when something fell from the sky and slammed into one of the buildings, causing it to collapse. This distracted everyone and gave them enough time for Nami to order Sue to get the princess and guard Captain out of danger. Meanwhile, the two elite agents were watching the dust cloud and saw a shadow slowly rise. Where is? The shadow asked as the dust cleared, revealing the figure. My pay? Line break. Several minutes later, as the Devil Kings were dealing with the bounty hunters, Izuku was making his way towards the source of the screaming until he came to a house that seemed to be bending and cracking as well as shaking. Walking calmly inside, he found none other than one of the Flying Six herself, Altai, who didn't seem to notice him yet as she continued to scream bloody murder. Having enough, Izuku unleashed a small amount of Conquer's Haki, just enough to get her attention, which worked as instantly the screaming stopped as she blinked in surprise before slowly turning her head towards the teen, laying her eyes on Izuku for the first time. Knowing he only had a few seconds, Izuku quickly explained. Now look, I'm about to set you free, but before I do, you need to promise me something. I'm not with the Beast Pirates but the captain of a different pirate crew, so before I free you I need you to promise that you won't attack my crew, he told her before quickly giving a brief description of each of his crewmates. Altai was unsettling quiet, not even questioning how he knew what crew she was with before asking in a quiet voice. Where is Pei? Izuku's answer was instant. I don't know, like I said, I'm a pirate that's just passing through, though I'm pretty sure he's not here if my Haki is correct, but you might want to ask one of the goons who chained you up, Izuku suggested, with Altai slowly nodding, but Izuku could see the veins slowly growing on her forehead. The keys are in the other room, Altai told him while jerking her head towards the other room, which Izuku quickly entered and found the keys. Less than a minute later, Izuku had taken the last of the chains off and helped Altai to her feet. Now then, let's go. And boom! Izuku trailed off as Altai, without saying a word, jumped high through the roof and high into the air. Or you can just do that. Line break. Where is he? Altai shouted again, directing her glare towards Mr. Five and Ms. Valentine, who gave each other confused looks before looking back towards the raging woman, right in time for the blonde woman to take a head but straight to the face, sending her flying and knocking her out. Mr. Five was instantly on guard and was about to fire his gun when Altai hit him with a Haki-powered kick. The blow instantly sent him flying into the building where the party was held. Altai huffed angrily before slowly turning and stalking towards Nami, who raised her jetty in fear while her homies circled around her. However, Altai didn't make it more than a few feet before Izuku landed in front of her protectively. I told you, you're not touching my crew. Now I thought you were going to go look for your brother, so hop to it, he told the woman while jerking this thumb to the side, getting another snarl from the woman before she went to go search for her beloved Pei. Seeing her gone, Nami breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks, Izuku, she told him, getting a nod from Izuku. Anytime, now then, he said before turning towards a now awake and extreme nervous Vivi. I think it's time we had a little talk, princess. Line break. And for the past 3 years, Igaram and I have infiltrated Baruj Works as a way to try and figure out what Crocodile is trying to do in my country, Vivi said, having just finished her tale. At first the princess had wanted to say nothing, but after remembering the massacre the pirates in front of her caused and still laying in the aftermath, she relented, so now they sat in the dining hall as Vivi told her tale. She also wanted to keep the fact the boss was one of the 7 warlords of the Sea Crocodile, which is why it came as shock when the captain of the crew revealed it himself, surprising both her and Igaram as well as Mr. Five and Ms. Valentine, who were now chained up with some of the sea prism stone from the ship. Well, princess, I think we can help each other, Izuku told her. My crew and I are already on fighting and taking down Crocodile, a task that you seemed you need done. So here's my deal. My crew and I will deal with Crocodile and his agents as well as escort you home if you pay as for the bounties of each agent my crew defeats. Here Izuku stopped and pretended to think for a moment. I believe that should come to 389,700,000 berries. Izuku fishnet before holding out his hand. Well, princess, do we have a deal? He asked. In actuality, it didn't matter if she took the deal or not. Izuku still planned to beat Crocodile and recruit as many agents of Baroque works as he can, with one particular member being absolutely vital to recruit. The rest of the crew was waiting as well, including Gloriosa, Sonia and Hawkeye, who went with the former two for addition backup. They knew what their captain was doing, having been filled in what Izuku was planning, and were ready for whatever the princess choice, though Nami, however, was really hoping she'd take the deal. How dare you try and extort the princess like this? Igaram thundered, jumping to his feet in complete outrage at what the pirates were trying after the nightmare they subjected the princess to not even an hour ago, and was about to throw more abuse at them when Vivi spoke. Why? She asked. Why ask for so little when you know what a rough state my country is in? You know you could ask for more, and even then I might still accept, so why so little? She asked, her eyes narrowing, knowing pirates usually had ulterior motives. Izuku could only offer a shrug. Like I said earlier, we were already planning on going after the croc from the start. Figure this way we can make a little extra cash out of it. He told her honestly, causing Vivi to blink in surprise. You were planning to fight that monster? Igaram shouted, surprised only to shut his mouth when Izuku shot him an annoyed glare. So, princess? Izuku asked again, turning back to Vivi, his arms still outstretched. Do we have a deal? He asked again, with Vivi weighing her options. It's not a bad deal, the princess admitted to herself as she looked at the crew. They all seem very capable and even have another warlord on their side. She thought, looking toward Hawkeye. Plus the amount is much less than it could have been. She thought, knowing that for an operation and job like this, anyone she could hire would ask for much more. Slowly, Princess Vivi slowly raised her hand and beefed slowly and surly, shaking the pirate captain's hand. It's a deal, she said, getting a nod from and smile from Izuku before the boy turned towards the two Baroque Works agents. Now then, Gem Makita, we need to have a little talk about your futures, he told them while causally standing up and leisurely walking towards them without a care, purposely using their real names to put more panic into their hearts. Which worked, as the two instantly froze up at hearing their names. Information like that was completely top secret, which only the boss having access to it. So for this rookie to know them, proved he wasn't normal in any sense of the word. Izuku at this point had reached them and bent down to eye level. So the way I see it, you have two options, Izuku told them before raising a finger. The first is to join my crew and help us challenge this world, and everyone in it. This includes your boss, whose devil fruit I happen to be quite skilled in, he told them while turning his hand into sand and back again. The second is to sit here waiting to die after those two report your failures, he finished while pointing out the window where everyone could see an oddly dressed order riding on top of a vulture who was flying away at swift pace. Gem and Makita, seeing this, shared a single glance with each other before smiling nervously towards Izuku. We graciously accept your offer, Captain, Makita agreed while hastily adding the last bit, with Gem nodding rapidly in agreement. Izuku was all smiles. Excellent choice. Line break. The next 2 hours went by a blur, as the Devil Kings loaded everything valuable from the town onto their ship. This included food, treasure, weapons, and anything else that they could fit into the Sharon, which, thanks to Igaram showing them secret stashes throughout the town. They had also met Karu, Vivi's pet super spotted billed duck, who was actually waiting patiently on the deck of the ship along with a very impatient and angry Ultai. There you are, you stupid blue-haired hitch, she shouted towards Vivi, who immediately took a step back in fright. Where is my Pei? I looked all over this dump and couldn't find him anywhere, so where are you keeping him? She demanded, only getting a shake of the head from the princess. I'm sorry, but you're the only one we found in the creator, she admitted, getting a roar of anger from the short-tempered girl. Oh, that's just great. First that big bear bastard sends me to this dump, and now I'm told my precious Pei isn't even here. She yelled towards the sky before glaring down to Izuku. You freed me, so take responsibility and take me to my pay. The woman ordered, getting a scowl from Bonnie. Oh, and just why would we do that, huh? Bonnie demanded, not giving a crap that she was taking with an elite member of a Yonko's crew. Altai instantly got in the pink-haired woman's face. Because I said do, idiot, she retorted, and was seconds away from delivering an all-time mortar when Izuku pulled her back. Look, I know you want to get back to your brother, and I'm not against helping you, Izuku told her before leaning close. But you need to realize that we're not a charity service. You board our ship, you pull your weight, got it? He asked, causing Altai to growl and narrow her eyes before slowly nodding. Good, now then Bonnie, show her to the women's quarters, Izuku told his cook, who scowled but nodded as she led the short-tempered woman into the ship. Are you sure that was wise, Captain? Hawkins having stayed silent during the entire exchange. Izuku looked at him briefly. You said that chances of misfortune falling was round 5%, right? Well, with odds like that I feel confident in making moves like this, he told the fortune teller, who nodded, remembering just how low the odds of misfortune were. In Hawkins' eyes, after seeing everything his captain can do, poaching a member away from a Yonko was nothing. By this point the rest of the crew had repapered, with Kid looked like he was going to be sick. What the hell happened with him? Izuku asked, causing Kid to shudder. I don't want to talk about it, was all he said, causing Nami to roll her eyes. Igaram decided to disguise himself as Vivi, and Kid didn't take it well. As for Igaram, well, like I said, he's dressed as Vivi and plans to distract them long enough for us to boom. All at once the Devil Kings turned and raced towards the edge of the ship, where a massive fireball could be seen in the distance. Igaram, Vivi cried, knowing it could be nothing else, before trying to jump into the ocean and save him, only for Izuku to hold her back. Let me go, I've got to save him, she cried desperately, trying to desperately get out of his hold. Izuku was having none of it. Good grief, calm down, he's fine, Izuku shouted at her, causing her to freeze and slowly turn to him. What? She asked in a whisper. The man is fine, a little shaken and disoriented, but fine. I'm sure he's heading towards Arabasta as we speak, Izuku reassured her, with the other observation hockey users confirming the story. Hearing this, Vivi managed to calm herself down, and the crew managed to finish their preparations and leave Whiskey Peak and head towards their next destination, all the while seemingly unaware of the ship and its lone passenger following them. Line break. It was the next day, and Vivi was somewhat still trying to adjust to everything that was happening. Less than 12 hours ago, she and Igaram were posing as bounty hunters in the very organization that was threatening her country, with no real plan to speak of, and now she was on the ship of the very crew that slaughtered the entire town. And won't that be a sight for anyone who arrives there afterward? Vivi thought. She was also for the first time in 3 years without Igaram, and despite being told by multiple people of the crew that he was alive, she couldn't help but worry. The strangest and most worrying part was that she was riding with now 2 supposedly former Baroque Works agents, Mr. Five and Ms. Valentine, or as she knew them now as Jem and Nikita. Now she didn't have anything against the 2 personally, but considering that they were part of the organization she was trying to take down, she couldn't help be skeptical. Speaking of the 2, she looked down from where she was standing and couldn't help but be more confused as she watched the crew go about their day. Killer, Hawkins and surprisingly Altai were sparing against Hawkeye, though it was obvious the former warlord was barely trying. Izuku and Law were lounging in a couple of deck chairs, looking to be asleep, with a couple of fishing poles nearby. Kid and Jem were by the cannons discussing just how they could increase their explosive force, and judging by their slightly crazed smiles they were onto something. Monet and Bonnie were simply following Law and Izuku's example and simply sunbathing for the time being, with Nami glancing at her log pose every so often to make sure they weren't turned around. The ones who weren't on deck were the 2 Kuja who were checking on their fellow Kuja, and wasn't that another surprise find, and Bonnie and Nikita, who after revealing at this morning's breakfast that her dream was to be a chocolatier, had been practically dragged back into the kitchen by Bonnie, who had a mad gleam in her eye. Vivi let out a sigh as she glanced towards Karu, who was giving her a concerned look. Smiling, she gently petted his head in reassurance. It's fine, Karu, just still trying to process everything that's happened recently, I guess, she told him, getting a reassuring smile from the duck. Well, that's to be expected given what's happened. Vivi let a scream as she stumbled back until her back hit the railing, getting everyone's attention. As they glanced up to see what caused Vivi to scream, this included the Kuja as well as Bonnie and Mikita, who after seeing just who caused the princess to panic started to panic as well. Is all Sunday. She screamed. She looked up at the boss's right hand in horror. The woman in question smirked, but before she could say anything else, Izuku addressed her. Nico Robin, I've been waiting to meet you. There's something I want to talk to you about. He told her, getting right to the chase and getting a raised eyebrow from the woman in question. Oh, and just could the infamous new rookie want with me? She asked, highly amused. Poneglyphs. And like that, everyone could see the change that occurred, and the newcomer instantly lost all traces of amusement and became cold and guarded. Oh, and just what do you know about those? She asked, her smile still present, but it was one that promised pain if he wasn't careful. Though Izuku didn't seem worried as he answered. I know that there should be 30 of them in the world, and there are 3 types of them. Historical poneglyphs, which reveal pieces of ancient history as well as messages written by ancient people. Instructional ones that contain instructions/clues on the locations on historical ones. And finally the road poneglyphs, the ones I'm personally most interested in because the 4 are assumedly needed for someone to make their way to the One Piece. Well, wasn't that a bit of an info dump? Looking around at his crew members, Izuku could help but chuckle at the gaping looks he was getting from Kid and Law, who were probably trying to process what they just learned about finding the legendary treasure. Everyone else showed varying levels of surprise except Altai, and because she was part of a crew who already had a road poneglyph, might have already known about it. The real reward here, however, was the reaction of Nico Robin, who seemed stunned at what she was being told. Slowly she jumped down to the deck and slowly and carefully approached Izuku. What else do you know about them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I know that in order to find the real poneglyph. Here Robin sucked in a breath. Is composed of only 9 of the other poneglyphs, and to discover its true meaning one must take the other passages with them to the final island, which will be revealed by the 4 road poneglyphs. It took everyone about 5 seconds for them to realize what Izuku was saying, and when they did, their eyes all widened at the implications. That's right, to discover the true history of the world, including the Void Century, it appears one must travel to the final island, and the same one the One Piece is located on. Izuku assured their thoughts. For the crew that knew who he was, this was still a massive bit of information, and while they knew it might not technically be accurate for their world, it was still a massive clue into getting to the One Piece. For the 4 other humans and 1 duck, however, it was mind-blowing. They couldn't believe what they were hearing, and a part of them were saying that the boy in front of them was nuts. But the way he spoke didn't indicate that, and the information sounded too genuine to be fake. Still, Robin wasn't going to be deceived or trusting so easily. How? She demanded, glaring at him in suspicion. How the hell do you know all of this? Her composure breaking as she glared at the young man in front of her. Izuku himself let out a sigh before looking towards the new passengers on the ship. Well, he said, scraping the back of his head with a sigh. That's a bit of a long story. And with that, Izuku explained everything: his quirk, his past, his world, and finally how he came to this world and what he'd been doing since he came here. He shut down any doubts once they had left by again, like he did before, giving out small details of the 3 devil fruit eaters' past to show that he did have their memories, and while some things were slightly different than the ones they had, it was enough to convince them he wasn't just spouting bullshit. It was a little more tricky with Robin, so Izuku just stuck with her time before Ohara and her time with Clover and the other archaeologists, making sure she knew that he knew that they were truly good people, and if the small smile and sink tear that appeared, he succeed. Once he was done, Robin was satisfied with his answer, and while she still had a lot of questions, she was satisfied for now and had an idea of what he wanted from her. As for Jem, Mikita, and Vivi, that were still trying to fully comprehend what was they just learned. Jem even fell to the ground in shock. Damn. He finally settled on looking towards his new captain. That's one hell of tale, boss. He told him before glancing towards the rest of the crew. I'm guessing you knew about this already, if your lack of reactions are any indication. He told them, getting nods in return. However, any further discussion were put on hold when the sound of faint cannon fire reached their ears, instantly grabbing their attention. Monet. Izuku said, and the snow woman nodded, and without a word took to the sky, having been named the scout considering she could fly and was practically invincible unless one knew hockey. When she was gone, the crew prepared themselves for battle, with Nami and her homies getting in front of Vivi to protect her. They spent the next 30 seconds waiting for the snow woman to reappear. And when she did, she had the slightest of troubled looks on her face. "Well, Monet, what do we look at here?" Izuku asked with her letting out a hum. "Well, the good news is they weren't firing at us," she told them. "And the bad news?" Bonnie asked with a sigh, knowing nothing was that simple. "We're looking at about a fleet of 50 ships," the snow woman told them, getting gaps of disbelief from the rest of the crew. "Who the buck has a crew that big? Are we dealing with the Yonko already?" Kid demanded, and let out a sigh of relief along with everyone when she shook her head no. "Well then, who are we fighting?" he demanded, getting a smile from Mont. "Why, none other than the pirate armada and rulers of the East Blue themselves, the Krieg pirates."
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.